All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the House Environment and Transportation Committee for Thursday, February 20th. We will start with House Bill 915, Delegate Foley, Out-of-State Driver Accountability Act.
Can I call up my panel, Mr. Chair? Let me see. Who do I have here? Have John Becker and Dan Reed and Action Committee for Transit, and yeah, I think that's it.
And on my sheet, it says that John Becker was virtual, had to cancel, so.
Okay. Is that it?
John Snag, who was virtual. They just showed him. He's on that panel.
Oh, John Snag?
Yeah.
He's on virtual.
Yeah, I just saw him.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and the wonderful members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Linda Foley, and I'm presenting HB 915, Motor Vehicles, Out-of-State Drivers Enforcement. We're calling it the Out-of-State Driver Accountability Act. This piece of legislation is a Vision Zero bill and is a response in part to the DC STEER Act, which passed the DC Council in 2024. The DC STEER Act empowers the DC Attorney General to bring civil suits against out-of-state drivers who have moving violations. While the DC STEER Act has broader provisions, this bill is a response to that and focuses on the ability of the Maryland Attorney General or a local state's attorney to be able to take action against an out-of-state driver or vehicle with unpaid citations, including those issued under automated enforcement programs, in other words, cameras. Just to give you an idea of the scope of this problem, in June 2023, WBAL-TV investigated how many out-of-state drivers are not paying their speeding tickets from speed cameras on I-83 here in Maryland. The data from the Baltimore City Department of Transportation indicated that 43% of out-of-state drivers did not pay their tickets. And yet, there are no tools for our state at this time to go after these drivers to pay these citations. To give a sense of the sheer number of unpaid tickets we're talking about, between July 13th, 2022 and March 31, 2023, about 237,000 speed camera tickets were issued on I-83, according to the WBAL-TV study. Of these, 51,000 were issued to out-of-state drivers, with more than 22,000 of those remaining unpaid at the time of the investigation. HB 915 also requires each county and municipality to submit a quarterly report to the Vision Zero coordinator on each out-of-state citation issued. It is our understanding that the Maryland Municipal League is favorable with amendments to this bill, one of the amendments of which is that if a local jurisdiction has no out-of-state citations, then the jurisdiction shouldn't be required to submit a report for that quarter. And I'm working with MML on this amendment, but I think we'll come to some conclusion on that. Also, our state currently does not allow MDOT to collect uniform ticketing data. The data is kept individually in over 100 jurisdictions across the state, and this makes it hard to determine how many unpaid tickets exist at any given point. That's why I am sponsoring an amendment to allow MDOT to collect data and to allow the department to report both in-state and out-of-state violations. HB 915 begins to address the unpaid out-of-state tickets problem by enabling the Attorney General or state's attorney in a jurisdiction to bring civil action against unpaid or overdue citations, specifically for DC residents and registered vehicles. So that part is only about DC residents. It's important to note that no case can be brought if a ticket is being contested, is not past the due date, has been paid, or if it's being paid on an installment program. HB 915 is a reciprocal bill, one that puts our state on the same rules for collection of out-of-state drivers as DC has. It provides local Maryland officials with the tools and resources necessary to ensure our roads are safer while receiving the appropriate revenue from automated traffic violations. For these reasons, I urge a favorable report on HB 915, and I'm happy to answer any questions except those from Terry Baker. I'm happy to answer his questions too.
Would you like your panel to go?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello. I'm Ben Ross. I represent the Action Committee for Transit. We support this bill with an amendment that it should apply to all states, all out-of-state drivers. This is as Delegate Foley said, this is a growing problem, not just in Baltimore. In Montgomery County, if you look at, I found some data in Montgomery County, and out-of-state drivers are an increasing proportion over time of the camera tickets, because the in-state drivers know that they'll get caught up when they re-register their car, and they're learning to pay, and the out-of-state drivers are learning that they don't have to pay. That needs to get fixed. We have an additional issue here is that I know in Baltimore City and vicinity, cars registered in Virginia are a serious problem. And if you include all out-of-state drivers, this bill will begin to address that problem, and it will target the most dangerous drivers, which in practice, you're only going to sue the people who have lots of tickets, who are the most dangerous. So as I said, we support this bill, but with the amendment that it should apply to all states.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Reed. I'm the Maryland Policy Director for Greater Washington. We work to advance better policies in housing, land use, and transportation across D.C., Maryland, and Virginia, and we strongly support House Bill 915. As written, this bill would allow the state's attorney to go after drivers with unpaid and overdue traffic citations. It is modeled on the D.C. STEER Act, which we also supported, which empowers the district to hold drivers in Maryland and Virginia accountable for reckless behavior. This is personal for me. I live off of Piney Branch Road in Montgomery County. It's a major road between D.C. and Maryland, where speeding and reckless driving have been a constant concern. As it currently stands, a driver licensed in the district can come into Maryland, rack up hundreds or thousands of dollars in speeding tickets just across the line in my neighborhood, putting people in both sides of the line in danger, and never have to pay. It's only fair that D.C. and Maryland have reciprocity for traffic citations issued to drivers in the other jurisdiction. This bill recognizes the reality of our multi-jurisdictional region, where people travel across state and district lines multiple times a day. I want to concur with Act's amendment. I think it should apply to other states as well, like Pennsylvania and Delaware and so forth. This will make the roads safer for Maryland while allowing Maryland to capture much needed revenue during our budget crisis. So we ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Great. And do you want us to bring up John Sang virtually, Delegate Foley?
Sure.
Work? Okay,
Yeah,
John Sang, Maryland Coalition for Roadway Safety.
Hello, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee. My name is John Singh, and I represent Maryland Coalition for Roadway Safety, aka Safe Roads Maryland. I strongly urge your support for House Bill 915. Maryland drivers are expected to pay their traffic citations. However, some residents of the neighboring District of Columbia exploit legal loopholes to evade accountability for violations committed on our roads. This practice puts Maryland drivers, pedestrians, and cyclists at unnecessary risk and cost. As we've heard, Washington already has the STEER Act, allowing its Attorney General to take civil action against Maryland residents for unpaid traffic violations. This bill is not about penalizing responsible drivers. Instead, HB 915 targets chronic offenders who disregard Maryland traffic laws and create hazards on our roads. HB 915 is necessary for these four reasons. First, it ensures reciprocity. Second, promoting road safety. Third, strengthening enforcement. And four, ensuring fairness. HB 915 is a common sense measure that enhances public safety and ensures fairness for Marylanders. I ask for your favorable report on HB 915. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have some questions. Delegate Guyton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Foley, thank you so much for bringing attention to this problem. This bill, I did not know that we needed it, but it sure sounds like a good idea. And I do have a question, but I want to say that I was unaware, because I have gotten tickets from other states, and I do pay them, so I guess it's okay to say this, and I've gotten a ticket from another country. And I was absolutely unaware that I didn't have to pay those. So, so I did, of course, being the law-abiding citizen that I am. My question to you is, first of all, it would be great for us to have that reciprocity with DC, but given what we've heard from our colleagues here in ENT over the past couple of years about the prevalence, particularly of Virginia tags in Maryland who actually live here but are licensed out of state, would it make more sense to expand this to all states and, in my opinion, all countries?
Thank you, Delegate, for the question, and I kind of knew it was coming based on the testimony here. But, on the surface, that seems like a really good thing to do. Mm-hmm. But remember, part of this bill is also a reporting and data collection. So one of the things I think we need to be a little bit careful of, I'm not saying I'm against that, but one of the things that we need to be a little bit careful of is if, for example, Virginia does not have the same law as DC has to go after Maryland voters, then our people are going to get nailed with tickets. I mean, they're going to come after us like Maryland with tickets. There is a concern on the part of some local jurisdictions that Maryland voters will be singled out because there isn't this reciprocity. So I think my preference, again, I could be persuaded otherwise, but my preference is to look at the data, see who the out-of-state drivers are that are committing the violations, and then perhaps come back. These are supposed to be quarterly reports, so we should be able to have enough data over, over the next year to figure out what states we should include. I'm not sure we should include all states. There may not be, for example, any reason to include New Mexico, right? So I think we should look at where, it seems intuitive that Virginia would be a state that, we might want to look at. But I think part of the bill is to also kind of dip our toe in the water and then see if, if this is as big a problem as it is elsewhere. Right now, DC has the law, so it makes sense to do it, a reciprocal bill to DC because they're already able to charge Maryland voters. This is actually empowering them to go after the drivers, right? So that's my response to that. I could be persuaded otherwise, and if the committee wanted to do something different, I certainly wouldn't be opposed to it, but I think that's what I've heard from local jurisdictions as to why not to expand it too much at this time.
May I have one follow-up question for clarifying? So I just want to make sure I understand. Currently, out-of-state drivers are receiving the tickets, correctly?
Yes.
Correct? Okay. There's just not been enforcement on whether or not they're paid. They can just ignore them if they want to.
Right, and as I believe it was Mr. Reed testified that, or maybe it's Mr. Ross, that when you, like in Maryland, if you have a bunch of tickets and you go to re-register your car, right, like you get caught, right? Then you have to pay off the tickets because you can't register the car. Well, you can't do that with out-of-state drivers, right? You have to bring an action against them. You have to actually go after them. There may also be a capacity issue with with our attorney general and state's attorney, but again, I think that it's worth looking at. So.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.
Great. I just want to keep Delegate Guyton out of trouble. So if I get pulled over in another state and get a ticket, do I have to pay that currently?
You're supposed to pay it, yes.
Yeah, there's an interstate compact that governs that.
Right,
So
right. You're supposed to pay it, yes.
But the speed camera citation, there's no interstate compact for that currently.
Oh, okay.
Isn't that so?
So there's more information there.
Isn't that so?
Yes.
Okay, Delegate Ruth. Delegate Terrassa.
I'm now confused so that, never mind, I'm confused now.
Okay. This bill, Delegate Foley, applies to citations from automated enforcement, right?
Yes.
Okay, it does not apply to if you're pulled over and ticketed by a law enforcement officer in another jurisdiction, because that's already covered by another law. Is that correct?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Follow my nod. Is that correct?
Yes. That's correct,
All
Mr.
right.
Chair.
Delegate Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate Foley, for the bill, and to your panel, old friends on your panel. My question has to do with how the mechanisms through which we collect, if your bills are passed, that we would collect the citations, the fines, when the vehicle is a rental vehicle. I'm asking because a constituent of mine came to my office out of the blue the other day to ask why it is that his business, which is a car rental business, gets stuck with unpaid tickets that his customers have gotten on his rental cars.
I know this is very complicated from the car rental company's point of view, but remember that when you're talking about automated traffic enforcement and photo camera enforcement, all that they get is a picture of the license tag. They don't get any other information on the driver. They're not pulling the driver over, so the citation is going to go to whoever has the registration for that vehicle. And it does, the bill does talk about the driver or the owner of the vehicle. So I think, I may be speaking, I'm not an expert on this, but I think what happens is that the rental car company would get the citation, and then it would be up to the rental car company to pursue the driver if they wanted restitution for that. Do I have that right? Yeah, you don't push the
Don't
button.
touch the button.
My,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, my, as a non-car owner, I have plenty of experience with tolls, camera tolls, and the rental car companies very definitely come after you if you get a camera toll. I don't have experience with tickets in a rental car, but I'm sure they can use the same system, and I'm sure they do, or try to.
Thank you, Mr. Ross, and thank you, Delegate. Mr. Chair, may I ask a quick follow-up? So because this was a matter of great importance to my constituent, I want to make sure I understand so that I can answer him when he comes back. My understanding is that the rental car companies have to expend a great deal of effort to track customers who've gotten tickets and not paid them. And according to my constituent, again, this is anecdotal, but his business can spend tens of thousands of dollars a month on tickets that are unpaid and that he can't collect. The mechanism, I think, described in the bill, or I think the existing law says something like, you know, if it's a rental car company, they have to get a police report, which is a paper document, and if some, I don't know, it's too complicated for me, and I'm glad that you're willing to tackle this, but the point is, a small business like that can't necessarily afford the resources to do that level of complicated collection. So what can we do?
Delegate, if I may, I think that's beyond the scope of this bill, because all that this bill, as the chairman got me to agree, is really about automated enforcement of traffic laws, okay? So, you know, and it's about out-of-state drivers, not in-state drivers, or I should say out-of-state tags, right? That's how you identify. And it's just, it's focused on the owners. Whatever the process is that car rental companies have, I have no idea, and that's not this bill. So I don't really feel like I'm in a position to answer those questions or address your concern. You know, I don't know what to tell you.
Okay, I asked. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I asked.
Okay, Delegate Healy.
Thank you very Mr. Chair. Just along the same lines of what's been asked, but with a little twist. If I understand your bill is aimed at DC basically because they have a policy that they already have in place. Does their policy target only Maryland drivers?
No. It targets, I can't remember, I think I have it here, actually.
It's Maryland and Virginia.
It's Maryland and Virginia, thank you.
Okay, so I guess the question then, I just wonder if it's even, and since we have an attorney, so many attorneys in the room, maybe somebody can tell me, but I mean, there's a lot of things about interstate commerce, and can you single out one jurisdiction just for a treatment that's different from every other jurisdiction in the country? And treat the DC differently from everybody else? I mean, is that legit? Is that constitutional? If you don't know, we'll find out later.
Yeah,
That's fine.
I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a constitutional expert.
And I'm not either, so
But
we'll find
DC,
out.
but the
We'll ask somebody
DC,
who knows.
but the DC law presumably has been in effect since, what did I say, 2024? Yeah, passed in 2024. I'm not aware that there's a challenge to the law, and they single out Maryland and Virginia.
Okay, well, we'll look into it. Thank you so much.
Delegate Otto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, this is an issue, and I have my neighbor got a ticket from DC on a vehicle that hadn't left Somerset County in 10 years. And how is the accuracy going to be for this? I don't want to put DC residents in the same consequence that DC put my constituent in.
Well, I think, you know, we have a very strict and tight, I'll say it that way, automatic enforcement program in Maryland. We are very precise about who gets citations and who doesn't. Those pictures are reviewed and analyzed before a citation goes out. So I have a little more faith in the accuracy of our ticketing procedure. I think, you know, again, this is not a citation that someone was stopped by a police officer. These are automated citations that are generated by speed cameras. So your license plate is on the speed camera or it's not, right? I mean, that's pretty easy to check. So I have actually, you know, your neighbor's experience notwithstanding, I don't know what DC does, but in terms of Maryland, I have a pretty high degree of confidence that we're not going to be charging DC drivers who don't have, you know, who shouldn't be charged. And by the way, the tickets can still be challenged. That doesn't mean that they can't be challenged. The citations can be challenged, and in fact, if they are under challenge in court, then this doesn't apply. The law says that.
Well, he wasn't going to go to DC to challenge the issue, but he didn't pay it either. And it's on a farm truck, and the tag number was the same that was on the farm truck, but it was on a Toyota Camry.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that sounds like that might have been a non-automated citation, because the picture of the license plate would clearly say that it was a farm truck license.
Well, computers don't lie, I don't guess, huh?
Yeah, I don't know.
Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Delegate Foley, for the bill. Mr. Ross, always good to see you. I also had some questions around not just rental cars, but company-owned vehicles that are driven by employees. But rather than delve into that, I can talk to you offline. I did want to ask if you could please share the study that you cited with members of the committee. You threw out a lot of statistics. Could you share that?
This was, again, it was by WBLA TV, and we have that study. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, we'll be happy to share that with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Sarasa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Delegate Foley, for bringing this. Just to bring it back, it seems like we're all pretty fond of this bill. We just want to see it be more.
Yeah.
But just to go back to your statement about why not expand to Virginia and other states, I thought, and maybe and the reason I'm asking is because I think I might be confused about how this works. You said something about if we included Virginia, for example, we might be in danger of Virginia going more after our folks. But isn't the fact that they don't have a similar reciprocal agreement, so they can't right now go after our folks, right?
Well, but they can issue citations.
They can issue citations, but they can't enforce them.
Correct. They
Okay.
can, yeah, but I'm just telling you what some jurisdictions gave me feedback on that
Okay.
part. Because I had that same question,
Yeah,
like, why
okay.
not go after?
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, what prompted this law was DC's going after Maryland drivers, and we have no way to go after the drivers from
Yeah,
DC.
that makes sense.
And I think that, it is worth saying, well, should we, because as been pointed out, that we do have a lot of drivers from Virginia in our state, and I'm sure that they commit a lot of traffic violations. And so, should we be able to go after them? These gentlemen, obviously believe that we should. And as I said, if the committee wants to go down that road, I'm certainly not opposed to it. I just think that, we need to think it carefully before we do it.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Boyce?
This is very quickly so I can wrap this up. Delegate Foley, can you talk about the fiscal impact of us not collecting automated tickets, fees from DC? And do you have the data about what that looks like for other surrounding states? Because regardless if they have a reciprocity, and I do thank you for putting this bill in as it relates to the reciprocity to or reciprocal nature for Washington, D.C., I would argue that it would be maybe beneficial to maybe have Virginia like just kind of the DMV. But I'd be interested in knowing the fiscal impact of not being able to collect.
Yeah.
These.
I'm going to let Mr. Ross talk about some Montgomery County figures, but let me just say this. Part of the problem when we looked at this bill, part of the problem is that MDOT doesn't keep that information. So we don't keep that, we're not allowed. But we don't keep that information on a statewide basis. That's an amendment I'm putting into the bill to allow that data to be collected. So it's hard, I think it's hard, and the fiscal note doesn't even go into that.
Right.
I think it's hard to figure out what the revenue would be without having the data. So an important part of this bill, I know we're all focused on going after the drivers that commit violations, but the other important part of this bill is the reporting function.
Yes, I did get that. I'm just trying to get a mention.
Yeah, but
of the
I don't.
fiscal impact. But then secondly, and this is not for the committee, but maybe for the subcommittee, we can talk about what that process looks like, because I guess I assume that MDOT or SHA or MVA would just send a bulk of what they may have to a Virginia or to a DC and say, here. Because I certainly have gotten a ticket from a U-Haul truck. I don't know, maybe I sped a little bit too much. But they sent me that, and then I had to pay it. So I don't know if then they paid it and then recouped it, but I did get the ticket in the mail, and I did have to pay it.
Yeah.
And I understand for most, in trying to recoup that, not everybody, as Delegate Guyton mentioned, pays, but I did pay. So they do have a way, they just don't have to wait a way of enforcing it where they end up eating the cost.
But automated enforcement is on a local level.
I
And so
understand.
that part of the amendment would say, we're going to aggregate that data and get the information that you seek
Right.
on a statewide basis. But I'm going to let Mr. Ross answer.
That-
give you
I'd
some-
appreciate that.
Yeah, go
Thank you.
ahead.
I have, there's a Montgomery County report.
Sure.
Which I can share with the committee. Roughly, it looks like, it's not broken down by the state that the out-of-state
number would
driver
be
is
nice.
from. It looked like in the ballpark, if you collected out-of-state drivers at the same rate as in-state drivers.
Yes.
It would be about another, $1 million, $2 million a year. Now, that money would go to the counties.
I understand that. I just
but
wanted
the
a number.
counties need
Thank you
money,
so
too.
much. Thank you.
Okay. Delegate Foley, I don't know where you got this wonderful idea, but great bill. No further questions.
I
That
agree,
concludes,
Mr. Chair. I agree it's a great bill.
That concludes billing on HB 915. We'll turn to HB 97. I think we have the majority leader. Maryland Department of Transportation, electric vehicle charging infrastructure expansion plans and programs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. House Bill 897 is an attempt to codify a requirement that Maryland have some idea about what the EV charging infrastructure needs to look like in order to meet other statutory goals we've set, greenhouse gas reduction, clean cars, and the like. That's the model of the bill. What I put in front of you here, the standard I chose was the 60% greenhouse gas reduction and the net zero by 2045. And to be clear, I'm not trying to create a fiscal note here. So if you all want to align this as suggested by MDOT, they may be in various places beginning to do this sort of analysis. You're certainly welcome to try and tailor the bill to reflect work that is already going on. But I have become convinced that whether you like EVs or not, we need some sort of bill like this that would codify a requirement that we actually understand how far we are from how many EV charging stations we need in order to sustain a world where 100% of the cars in the state are going to be electric, and we have enough cars on the road that we're meeting a 60% and 100% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. I'll also point out a few other things and some places where this bill came from, but in looking at the code, we required in law this kind of infrastructure planning, but on a very limited basis. We put it in there for the state fleets of EVs. We need to plan for adequate charging. That's in state law. For clean trucks, we need to plan for adequate EV charging. Again, that's in state law. For the coming building requirements we have to plan for EV charging. But somehow, for all of the rest of the consumer automobiles that we're planning to sweep into the state, we did not codify a requirement that the state have some plan to provision for enough EV charging. And frankly, at this point, I don't know that we have the funding for it. But I do think, again, if we set these sort of lofty goals out there, we ought to know every year how far the state is from creating a usable EV network. So why did I do this? My wife bought an EV not too long ago, and so I've been in real-time field testing what the state's EV infrastructure looks like in Western Maryland, on the shore, and in the urban areas. And she also had the bright idea to have us drive to Florida in an EV, and so I was able to test the entire route from here south to 95. And I will tell you, it's not in a good state. And I don't believe we are prepared for the type of lofty EV goals that we are setting out there. And so correspondingly, there are two other things that were happening as I was undertaking these real-time experiments. One, there was polling coming out suggesting that 40% of current EV owners would not repurchase an electric vehicle. And when you look at some of the reasons why that is, and the U.S. is leading the globe in the percentage of people who feel this way. Europe, China, it's almost half. As the negative sentiment is almost half. And when you dig into why that is, 35% of respondents said the public network's not good enough yet. 32% said EVs impacted their driving patterns on long trips. Certainly, I can tell you, I've experienced some of these hurdles myself. Some of these will be, with technology getting better on range, I think it'll take care of itself. But again, on the aspect of charging infrastructure, we are very far from a gas station sort of reliability and access point network in the state. And I was surprised to drive to Kent Narrows and stay at the brand new Hyatt there and see that a new construction hotel 1 hour from Washington, D.C. did not have any EV charging stations for the local tourism market. So something is very broken here. And when I reached out to folks over the summer to try and get an understanding of where the state was in planning, what I gathered was we were planning on how to spend the federal grants that were given to us for EV charging stations. But that is a very different plan than what I'm describing, which is to actually set an adequacy and needs analysis and then work backwards to make sure that the state is meeting those goals. So, that's, I'll shut up there and happy to take any questions. And by point of global comparison, again, I told all of these stories in my horror story driving to Florida to friends who recently moved from the DMV to China because they're in the Foreign Service, and they laughed and they said, that's crazy. In China, there's an EV charger, it's every 5 feet, that a country who's building modern infrastructure right now is planning for a different, very different infrastructure than we are. So that's the bill.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Leader. Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, sorry. Thank you, Delegate Moon. This is obviously a really important issue. And I just wondered if you had a sense of how much, so I know that you said MDOT is already doing some of this planning, but some of that is in conjunction with the NEVI program, which has now been suspended. And whether and how, like, would this sort of pick up some of the slack from what's been suspended from NEVI, and then of course the funding that goes along with NEVI is suspended, and if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, so again, let me be very clear too. My goal now is to zero out the fiscal note on this bill and have it try and reflect work that's already going on in-house in the state. So this is entirely just an adequacy planning bill. It is not contemplating that we actually fund into existence the EV charging infrastructure contemplated here. And in fact, I think some of it's going to come online through private charging, people installing at their houses, and that should all be factored into whatever we do. I just think because some of these greenhouse gas emission goals are going out decades, 2031, 2045, they're going way past the time that this assembly and this administration is going to sit. And so as we've codified a requirement in law that some of this planning happened for some of the other requirements we did, it seems strange that we wouldn't have done it for the largest EV expansion category that we're putting into law. So again, it's sort of, I think this needs to ride independent of what's going on at the federal level.
Thank you.
Delegate Ziegler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is a tremendously important issue. I'm so glad you brought this. In all the articles I've read about Norway, which has an almost 100% EV car, they've done a combination of taxes and tax incentives to make EVs much, much cheaper. But they started by building charging stations. Like, they did that first. And I feel like we're kind of backwards. But I wanted to ask you about the federal situation. I keep seeing headlines that say that, billions have been allocated and we've built 58 charging stations. That's the number literally the number I always see. So what went on there, and how can we not do that here? And I think data is possibly part of it, but obviously something's going really wrong with the charging
Well, I'll
station.
start you with two points. And, the folks behind me from the administration will probably be able to give a lot more detail on it. But at least from what I understood as of this summer, and this was before the incoming administration did what it's going to do, there was something like $11 million for the whole of the statewide EV charging network to build out, and it was 100% federal. Again, someone can correct my math on this, but there was, I think, almost zero contemplated on the state funding side of this to plus up, what the federal charging situation was. When I hear this, and I have no idea where that 11 million is. Do we have the cash in hand? If we don't, then I think it's highly suspect. But again, even 11 million, when you look at how far at just my back of the napkin math, seem to think we are from having a usable EV charging network that contemplates these goals. Again, if it's 0 or 11 million, I think we need to know what's the denominator. You know, exactly what are we trying to get to? And it's odd that we're putting these requirements into law without knowing that.
Including the manufacturing requirements.
Yes.
So, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Tarassa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Delegate Moon, for this bill. So, as you probably know, I've done a lot of EV bills in my career. And one of the things I keep hearing is like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? That's sort of not a reference to yesterday's bill or anything, but I had an egg bill yesterday. So a lot of what I heard when I was trying to require charging stations in all new construction, and I was just working on residential, but we could also be looking at commercial and other, was we don't have enough EV drivers to warrant putting in the infrastructure. Do you think it's a chicken or egg issue, or do you think we really need to put the infrastructure in first? And would it help to have it put in new construction?
So I think you're limiting the market cap if you don't have the infrastructure there. People with very specific use cases are going to make use of it. I mean, I want to be clear, this EV is really great for 90% of the driving our household does. But there are situations, and you can see it in some of the polling that I described. If you have 40% of current EV owners not sure about whether their next auto purchase is going to be an EV, and they're specifically talking about things like the adequacy of the public charging networks and how that's impacting their driving behavior on long trips, I think again, I think this could put a market cap. If you have a 2 or 3 auto household, as I currently live in, well, then you have a different range of options. But as we're confronting with renters, people who don't live in a single family home, again, maybe someone knows something I do that we can hit, 100% greenhouse gas reduction in a few decades and 60% by this time without that type of expansion of electric cars. I mean, I'd be curious to see the math on that. But again, it seems to me that if we're setting these large goals out, you can impute some number of the cars in the state have to go green. And if we're not ready with the charging network, again, my theory of this bill is it is not, the chicken and egg question's a little bit more clear than that. We have clear data suggesting that the charging network is going to be a limitation on adoption.
Great, thank you.
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, good to see you. Just taking a quick look at your bill, I think I know the answer to this, but I just wanted to clarify. So it seems like your bill is sort of agnostic to whether we're talking about charging capacity for personal vehicles or heavy trucks, right? Because we know that the marketplace and the infrastructure is very different right now for heavy trucks versus, personal vehicles. So would it be looking at both?
It certainly could, but heavy trucks are actually contemplated in the clean trucks section of law where they actually discuss having adequate EV charging infrastructure. And this is what I mean. I was just sort of skimming through looking at where did we actually require planning and studying for adequate charging infrastructure. And we did it on multiple categories of electrification, but not the large category of all the ordinary drivers going through.
Sure. Delegate, sorry, Mr. Chair, sorry, I'm a lot of practice for a couple of days here. May I have a follow-up? Thank you. So it's certainly contemplated in law. There's no question about that. But we also know that what the reality of the situation is for heavy truck charging, it's virtually non-existent, at least in a public way in Maryland. So could this potentially address that issue? I don't see any limitation here. I'm just kind of curious if it would kind of look at that as well.
Certainly, and I'm not in favor of it, but the electrification of cars is certainly leading to people bringing heavier and heavier vehicles into electrification. And if they're on the market, I think we should plan for it and understand it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 897. Before we turn to our next bill, we have a couple of students shadowing members today. We can ask them to stand up and wave. Kate Ware, she's shadowing Delegate Lehman. She goes to Hood College, class of 2026. And Mahi Kangora, whose name I just butchered, shadowing Delegate Foley, University of Maryland, class of 2028. Welcome. And we will now turn to House Bill 963, Delegate Moon on behalf of the Montgomery County delegation, Montgomery County highways, maximum speed limits.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, colleagues. This is a local bill. You may recall it, you've seen it before. There's a series of proposals over the years to give counties and in some instances cities more control over speed limits in county roads and city roads, to give the counties and cities more control over speed limits. As you know, they're currently, most of these are stipulated in state law, but over the years we've been granting these jurisdictions more authority. Montgomery County was one of the early pilot counties for this type of policy, so we were very cautious. Delegate Barve, the former chair, was very cautious in how we approached this. He put in all these requirements, no speed cameras when you lower the speed, and you have to do these studies when you're proposing to do this. But as we are sitting today, Montgomery County has now done a countywide study of speeds and designated various speeds for roads, and so the study is no longer necessary. Having said that, this bill continues to fail in the Senate every year. So I have to say, I do worry that even the form of the bill we put before you may not be clear enough for the Senate. So I will likely be in here with amendment, because what the county delegation did was we said, no, you don't need to do a study in Montgomery County. We all know that the reason why that is because the county's already done a countywide study. But I think we might need to say that in the law to alleviate the concerns of our senators. So I will be back before you with an amendment to that effect.
Thank you. Any questions on this local bill? Delegate Lehman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I am asking this out of interest. The topic is interesting in general, but also I got a similar law passed for Anne Arundel. So is the problem the study piece that this is the 15-mile-an-hour speed limit bill, right? So is it the issue of studying on a road-by-road basis whether a road would qualify for that lower speed limit, or that the county has already done a countywide study and doesn't think that this is duplicative? What is it?
The county has already done a countywide study, and they have maps and guides for what the speed should be on all the types of roads in the county. It's comprehensive. It's done the study for the whole of the county, and so this is seen as an unnecessary requirement. But again, one of the reasons we just deleted the language altogether was because the county authorities are telling us where those actual speed guidelines exist is in a couple different documents, and they may change over time, but they do exist. And so they resisted us naming any documents in the law, which is why you see what you have before you. But I am now intent to start naming those documents to help this thing move along.
Thank you for that, and I'd love to talk to you offline
Yes.
further. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we have another witness on this, I believe, Ben Ross from Action Committee for Transit.
Good evening, good afternoon. Again, I'm Ben Ross from Action Committee for Transit, and we support this bill for the reasons that Delegate Moon gave. And I'll just add one more. It's really kind of a paperwork issue. How do you even do a traffic study on a residential street where a car comes by every 5 minutes? It's just in many of these cases, just unnecessary paperwork. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Any questions? Okay, that concludes bill here on House Bill 897, or 963, excuse me. We'll turn to Delegate Allen, House Bill 1139, Motor Vehicles Intelligent Speed Assistance Systems Pilot Program Establishment.
Residential street where a car comes by every 5 minutes. It's just unnecessary in many of these.
All right. Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, friends, colleagues. My name is Delegate Nick Allen. I'm here to talk to you today about my bill and testify in support of House Bill 1139. HB 1139 would establish an intelligent speed assistance pilot program within the Motor Vehicle Administration. The program requires drivers who would otherwise have their licenses suspended for chronic speeding, reckless driving, or racing to install and use technology that limits their motor vehicle speed based on the applicable speed limits for 1 year. This technology sits on the dash or just on the center console of a person's vehicle and uses GPS technology to ensure the driver is in compliance with the posted speed limit. It's incredibly accurate, and as a person moves from the street to an interstate, it recognizes that they need to speed up to merge into the highway, and it allows for that. If the person tries to exceed the speed limit, the vehicle does not allow it to go faster. I actually demoed it earlier today, just outside on Roe Boulevard, and it's the GPS part is incredibly accurate. Like the very instant I crossed from a 25-mile-per-hour speed limit zone to a 40-mile-per-hour speed limit zone, it knew. There's no lag like in your GPS in the car where sometimes there's like a little bit of a time delay. Absolutely no lag. And it's a very, it's a really kind of weird feeling when you are giving it gas and it is not going faster than what the speed limit is. It's pretty remarkable. So this technology that we're talking about has been in place for decades, or has been around for decades, and successfully used in commercial fleets all over the world. New York City and London have used pilot programs and showed that it is effective in preventing speeding. Last year, the District of Columbia was the first to require this technology for use with chronic speeding offenders. And just this past week, or this week that we're in, the Commonwealth of Virginia passed similar legislation. Bills are also pending in Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, New York State, and Washington. This would not apply to speed camera citations. I want to highlight that. This is much like Delegate Foley's bill, applies only to instances where law enforcement officers pull individuals over. Last year, Maryland police agencies issued over 68,000 speeding citations, and between 2020 and 2023, 7,800 drivers received 3 or more speeding citations from a law enforcement officer. The fact is, one of the most dangerous things that we do every day is ride in a motor vehicle. One of the biggest threats to our roads is speeding, which is attributed to an average of more than 8,000 crashes that have resulted in more than 3,300 injuries and 99 fatalities, according to the Maryland Motor Vehicle Administration. And I know that this committee specifically, and the General Assembly in general, is committed to that Vision Zero goal. To be frank, Maryland also has some of the least safe drivers in the nation. I think we have a reputation for that. Maryland's often in the news for devastating high-speed crashes in excess of 100 miles per hour that kill and severely injure innocent people. Under existing law, the penalties for speeding, reckless driving, and racing are fines and license suspension. This is a real burden for people who have their licenses suspended. It prevents them from getting to and from work, driving their kids to school, and other important tasks. The fact is, we know that many people continue to drive anyway, even after their licenses are suspended. According to the MVA, they estimate around 75% of people who have suspended license just continue driving. The device that we're talking about here is programmable. It can be set to the speed limit or even to a few miles an hour above it. The device features an override button that could be used occasionally for safety, such as in a no merge zone on a highway or if someone else is driving the vehicle. The cost of the device is similar to the ignition interlock program that stops people from driving when they're drunk, the breathalyzer system. It costs about $4 a day, and for people who qualify, the MVA fee who qualify as indigent, the MVA fee will be waived, and manufacturer will offer a 50% off the monthly lease fee, which mirrors the successful ignition interlock program for people with DUIs. It is used for compliance and monitoring purposes only and is never shared externally, and all the data belongs to the MVA. HB 1139 is supported by at least 17 traffic safety groups, and I view this as a win-win innovative solution to a very real and deadly problem as we continue to pursue Vision Zero. By requiring the most chronic and dangerous speed offenders to use technology that limits their speed to the posted speed limit, innocent lives will be saved. Additionally, I want to thank Sergeant Kep, who's here, and Marietta Squire for testifying today about the impact that speed has had on their lives. Finally, the amendments I have requested are technical and would ensure that Maryland stays within the requirements of federal law for commercial drivers. I heard a favorable report from the committee, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Delegate Allen. Are there questions on the bill? Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, just made me think about what we were talking about earlier. So how does this work if someone has multiple vehicles? Like, in my household, we have, 3 vehicles. Obviously you could have this device installed in one of the vehicles, but what if I, decide that I'm going to drive one of those other vehicles? What happens in that situation if someone is driving a vehicle where the device is not installed properly? Like, is there additional penalties to them, or how does that work?
Let me check and get back to you, but I believe that they could install it in multiple vehicles if they wanted to be able to drive both vehicles. But if they only want to install it in one vehicle, then they wouldn't be able to drive the other one.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. But what if they are driving the other vehicle that, that they should have this device and that they've agreed to participate? Would there be sort of additional penalties to them for?
They would probably have to pay the same fee for both vehicles. The same $4 a day.
We can talk offline. I think I'm asking something that maybe you're not saying. We'll talk offline.
Okay.
Delegate Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, it's an interesting bill, and I think everybody knows how I feel about speeders.
Yes.
I think it follows what Delegate Nowacki said about if you have 3 cars and 1 driver, yet it seems, I think you're sort of rewarding somebody who's being penalized. And I'm wondering if somewhere along the way, that the penalty of that $4 a day could be increased. So they're feeling, you have to feel some pain.
Right.
And this particular pain is you can still drive, you just can't speed. But, and you pay a fine, and some people pay a fine, some people don't. It's sort of going back to what Delegate Foley was talking about, going in and out of cities. But maybe you have to feel some pain besides, if you want to drive and you've already been breaking the law, it seems like the $4 a day is nothing compared to what it could be.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I mean, I'd be open to something like that. I mean, I think, but I think also part of this is, again, if we want someone to be safe while they're driving, we don't necessarily want them to, like, if it were something astronomical, if it would be, $10 a day, so $300 a month, that might be insurmountable for someone. So someone who, is trying to keep their job and trying to get their kids to school or whatever, they might just take the license suspension in that case and just continue driving on a suspended license. So I think that's the needle we kind of need to thread here, right? Is I agree on the pain point and like the accountability point, but we also don't want to take it to such a level that this basically, unless they're forced to by a judge, make it so that they just say, just suspend my license anyway, and they take their chances. You know what I mean?
Yeah, thank you.
Delegate Davis.
Mr. Chair, my question is on the technology. Is it readily available? Is it one company? Is it a Maryland company? What do you know about that?
I don't know how many companies offer this. I know the technology is readily available. I know there's a number of different companies that do it. Like I used to work in fleet management when I worked for a food and beverage company, and most of our over-the-road truckers had similar devices installed in their cabs. So for commercial purposes and for logistics purposes, this technology has been around for quite some time, but the use of it for personal vehicles as a punishment for speeding is what's new here.
Thank you.
Okay, I do not see any further questions for the sponsor. We're going to bring up a panel of favorable witnesses: Sergeant Kep, Montgomery County Police Department; Marietta Squire, Families for Safe Streets; and Regina Ali, AAA Mid-Atlantic.
You sure? Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the committee. For the record, Regina Cooper Ali, Public and Government Affairs Manager for AAA in Maryland and Washington, D.C. Thank you so much. AAA is here in support of HB 1139, Motor Vehicles Intelligent Speed Assistance System Pilot Program Establishment. AAA certainly recognizes that speeding is a serious problem on our roadways, and speed-related crashes are a leading cause of traffic fatalities nationwide and here in Maryland. According to the MDOT Highway Safety Office, there were more than 7,700 speed-related crashes in Maryland in 2023, resulting in more than 32 injuries and 102 deaths. AAA supports requiring active intelligent speed assistance technology for combating repeat and egregious speed offenders. While the use of the speed limiting technology to address this dangerous and potentially deadly behavior is new, these devices have been used, as has already been stated by Delegate Allen, across the globe, in public transit, municipal fleets, commercial vehicles, and some private vehicles around the world, and they have demonstrated success in reducing speeds. Sadly, speeding persists on our roadways despite the dangers. In the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety Culture's annual 2023 Traffic Safety Culture Index, 61% of respondents perceived during driving 20 miles per hour over the speed limit on residential streets as very or extremely dangerous. 49% reported speeding 15 miles per hour over the posted speed limit as very dangerous. However, we continue to see people doing it. In fact, 49% of drivers said that even though they viewed it as very dangerous, they had exceeded the speed limit by 15 miles per hour on the highway in the past month, and 36% reported exceeding the speed limit of more than 10 miles per hour on the residential street. I see my time is ticking down. I'm just going to say that AAA is certainly supportive of any technology that could help keep our roads safe and reduce fatalities on our roadways, and for that reason, those reasons, we respectfully urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the Environment and Transportation Committee, thank you for once again allowing me to speak in front of you regarding traffic safety, Vision Zero, and the safety of all Marylanders on our roadways. My name is Sergeant Pat Kep with the Montgomery County Police Department. As I spoke about last week, and you all know, in October 2023, I was intentionally struck and nearly killed by an extremely dangerous driver in Montgomery County. Unfortunately, I can tell you firsthand how dangerous and deadly speeding is. Even modest increases in speed cause large increases in crash energy, and collisions that I assist in reconstruction with prove that. As a Montgomery County Police Sergeant, just recently assigned to the Traffic Operations Division, I see people driving in excess of 100 miles per hour regularly. The individual who struck me was going well over 100 miles per hour, and I had previously stopped him, or attempted to stop him, for going over 135 miles an hour. All too often, speeding is coupled with other deadly driving behaviors such as drunk and drug driving, distracted driving, and the crash that changed my life, intentional reckless driving behavior directly attributable to speed. House Bill 1193 fills a void in Maryland's approach to speeding drivers. A person who has their license suspended for speeding is either a chronic speeder or someone who's convicted of other speed or racing-related offenses. So I can tell you from that real-world experience, people do often drive on their suspended driver's license, and this bill would ensure those people now have a legal avenue to continue driving while ensuring that they do drive the speed limit to help maintain their work and family responsibilities and keep the roadways safe. As was mentioned, the District of Columbia passed this law in 2024. Virginia just passed a similar law this week. Maryland has a chance to save lives and make our region the national leader in roadway safety. Maryland is obviously considering a package of bills this year that I'm supporting, both here in this committee and others over the last 2 weeks, to address speeding, reckless, negligent, aggressive driving. House Bill 1139 is an important part of this package, and I urge you to pass it out of committee and into law this year. I will mention quickly for the points that were brought up, there are 15 companies that offer this technology, none of which are Maryland-based, but 15. And for the device itself, we see, especially with interlock, the goal is to reduce the recidivism, and that interlock has that, meets that goal, and the hope is with this as well. So we urge a favorable report.
Good afternoon, Chair Mark Corman, Vice Chair Regina Boyce, and members of the House Environment and Transportation Committee. My name is Marietta Squire, and I live in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. I was the mother of Kayla Williams Rawlinson, who died moments after the car she was riding in crashed into a concrete drainage wall in Accokeek, Maryland, in November of 2023. Kayla lived in Upper Marlboro most of her life, with the exception of undergraduate life and graduate life in California. Kayla loved life and was a happy person. Her smile was infectious. When Kayla laughed, we laughed. Kayla made such an impact on those in her orbit that her graduate school is establishing a memorial for Kayla in the Behavioral Health Building, where a bench has been purchased and will be placed. The bench will provide a peaceful place for current and future students to study and also read testimonies from various classmates and faculty about Kayla's impact on the school, students, and her clients. The testimony will be an inspiration to anyone feeling the rigors of academia and pressures to give up. On the night of the crash, Kayla and her boyfriend were riding in a car driven by a reckless driver who was in town visiting his family in Maryland during the Thanksgiving holiday. The driver, DeAndre Gross, grew up in Maryland, and it is where he spent most of his life. Kayla's boyfriend introduced her to the driver the night of the crash, and the driver said to Kayla and her boyfriend, "Leave your car parked, I'll do the driving." The driver failed to mention his many driving offenses: a DUI, multiple charges for driving on a suspended license, reckless driving, driving on a suspended registration without tags, an uninsured vehicle, and most egregiously, he was driving without a license the night of the crash because his license had been revoked. That fateful night ended with the driver speeding 80 miles per hour in a 30 miles per hour school zone, hitting the concrete wall moments later. Kayla's last words were, "You are leaving the road." Also that night, the driver had been pulled over for speeding. In conclusion, common sense is free, and action on House Bill 1139 will be costly. Intelligent speed assistance is tremendously important, and I'm hopeful Kayla's story will inspire legislators to pass this common sense safety measure. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
And Sergeant Cap and Ms. Squire, thank you for turning, such horrible personal experiences into sort of a call to action for all of us. I know that's not easy to do, but it does make a big difference. I'm not sure who the fourth person is there.
She's with me.
Okay, great. Are there any questions for this panel? Okay, thank you all again. We are going to turn to some virtual favorable witnesses. We'll bring back John Sang, Maryland Coalition for Roadway Safety.
Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. I'm John Sang. I represent Safe Roads, Maryland. I urge your support for House Bill 1193, which debuts the Intelligent Speed Assistance ISA System Pilot Program, a proven high-tech remedy to treat Maryland's epidemic of habitual speeding. Too many drivers treat our roads as their personal raceways. They persist in cold stone numbness to standing legal deterrence, disregarding the safety of others. These addicted speeders show an inability or unwillingness to control their actions behind the wheels of vehicles weighing 4,000 to 6,000 pounds or more. Their behavior leads to crashes, injuries, and fatalities. And the victims, well, they're not other people. They're our neighbors, our families, and ourselves, and people in the room, as we've just heard. Honorable members of ENT, there's no such thing as other people. License suspension alone is not enough because many offenders, as we've heard, continue to drive illegally. Now, right before you, HB 1193 offers a better path, intelligent speed assistance technology that actively prevents excessive speeding at the source. This approach has demonstrated remarkable success in London, New York, and in private fleets, reducing speed violations to as low as 1% to 3%. So, since there's no such thing as other people, who now at this hearing who cares deeply about your family, your friends, and even other people would still agree to take a pass on HB 1193 and, I don't know, just hope that the speeding addicts out there actually care in the least how much your loved ones mean to you or me. Maryland has an opportunity to lead in road safety, innovation, and lead in reducing roadway killings. I urge you to support HB 1193 and issue a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll bring up Mindy Baden. You are on mute.
Okay, here we go. All right. I'd like to thank Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and the Environment and Transportation Committee for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. And I want to express my condolences to Kayla's family. This is a photo of my son, Brett. He died 5 years ago as he was crossing the street to meet some friends for dinner. He's a reminder of why we're here today and why passing legislation to change the behaviors of aggressive drivers is so important. Speeding is one of the leading causes of traffic crashes in Maryland. In recent years, there's even been a surge in the number of pedestrian and bicyclist fatalities. For every 10 miles an hour over 50 miles an hour that a vehicle travels, the probability of death or serious injury doubles. I believe House Bill 1139 is crucial for enhancing road safety. We have Noah's Law, which requires people arrested for drunk driving to install ignition interlock systems in their vehicles. We need intelligent speed assistance systems to limit the top speeds of vehicles for those drivers who consistently excessively speed. The use of this technology will prevent speeding and reduce the risk of serious crashes. Those stopped for excessive speeding typically have been stopped multiple times for the same offenses. This is unacceptable. The ISAs will help ensure public safety by causing drivers to travel within the posted speed limits. It will be one more tool to ensure the safety of law-abiding Maryland citizens who use our roadways for driving, walking, or bicycling. And the use of ISAs will help to advance the goals of our Vision Zero programs. I am requesting that the Environment and Transportation Committee submit a favorable report for House Bill 1139. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will turn to Cameron Road.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. My name is Cameron Road. I'm a volunteer with Families for Safe Streets. In 2019, as the passenger in a car crash near my Gaithersburg home, Maryland Judiciary case search revealed that the speeding driver who collided with me and my friend had previous citations. I ask you to vote in favor of HB 1139 as a small measure to curtail excessive speeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. Good to see you. Cameron used to work here for everyone's benefit. We'll turn to John Corrin, Bike Maryland.
Hi, John Corrin, Bicycle Advocates for Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. Today speaking for a coalition of advocates from across Maryland under the Bike Maryland umbrella. Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. I will just double down on how important this is to vulnerable road users who are traveling outside of a vehicle, people on foot, on bike, disabled people using assistive devices. Last year in Maryland, over 570 people were killed on our roadways. More than 40% of them were vulnerable road users. I would just ask that you a favorable report on this and a variety of other bills that utilize technology, increase penalties, and provide other countermeasures to the deadly epidemic of road violence on Maryland roads. Thank you.
Thank you. We will turn to Callie Crumpus, Washington Area Bicycle Association.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman and members of the committee. I'm Callie Crumpus, and I'm with the Washington Area Bicyclist Association. We're a regional membership organization that envisions a just and sustainable transportation system where walking, biking, and transit are the best ways to get around. As John mentioned, your agenda today is full of safety improvements for vulnerable road users. And of course, we support speed limit reductions, prohibitions against stopping, standing, or parking in bike lanes, and penalties for drivers endangering vulnerable road users. We're also excited about the safety improvements through House Bill 1139 to establish an intelligent speed assistance system pilot program. We all know that speeding is deadly, and we've heard heart-wrenching stories already today. Excessive speeding increases vehicle stopping distances and reduces the amount of time a driver has to react in a dangerous situation to avoid a crash. It also reduces the ability of road safety structures like guardrails, median dividers, and concrete barriers to protect vehicle occupants in a crash. Drivers who repeatedly speed are disproportionately responsible for deadly crashes. A study in New York City found that of all deadly crashes in 2022, more than 35% were caused by the population of drivers who accumulated 6 or more speeding tickets in a year, despite being around 5% of drivers. Implementing ISA, along with other safety improvements in Maryland, would help address the more than 8,000 crashes attributed to speeding in Maryland between 2020 to 2023, which resulted in 3,300 injuries and 99 fatalities, according to the Maryland Highway Safety Office. We urge a favorable report on House Bill 1139, and we thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you so much. Are there any Questions for this witness, Delegate Lehman.
Question for the sponsor, but he's not in the room.
Okay, we'll can send him an email.
Well, and I don't know if any of the other witnesses can answer this, but the question, it came about from a conversation I had with someone who years ago had gotten however many DUIs or DWIs so that it got to the point where he was required to have the ignition lock technology. But he pointed out to me that I guess always that technology is only installed on one single car, and that any individual that's subject to that can avoid it, whether intentionally or unintentionally, by driving another car that the family might own or a friend might own. And so I wondered how this bill would contemplate a situation like that. Would it, are these devices mobile, or once they're installed, that's it? They stay with that one vehicle for that 1 year period. And if that hasn't been contemplated, I would suggest that it should be.
That's a good question. I think they asked the same thing about the technology on multiple cars, and so it is on the record and surely can be brought up in subcommittee. Are there any other questions? Hearing none, that ends the bill hearing for HB 1139, calling up HB 932, Public Ethics, Conflicts of Interest, and Blind Trust Governor. Mr. Chair, you may begin when you are ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I bring up a panel? Yes. Thank you. I should say the State Ethics Commission is up here, but they're up here for informational purposes. They don't take a position on the bill. Colleagues, I am bringing before you the Conflict of Interest Act, HB 932. He's not here, but I want to give some credit to Delegate Stewart, who's been working on issues related to this for years. I was flipping through my newspaper the other day, and I saw a story out of Madison, Wisconsin, where a project for a new rail station in a rural part of the state had not been included in the prior governor's budget. The new governor got elected. He added that rail station to this rural part of the state and funded it. And they found out a few months later that it was actually next to property that new governor owned in Wisconsin. And I thought, gosh, I'm glad that didn't happen in Maryland. That sounds really, really awful. And then I kept flipping through the paper, and I found a story out of Honolulu, Hawaii, where the governor of Honolulu was awarding some grants to their Department of Housing. And it turns out one of those grants benefited a property that his stepmother owns. And I thought, ooh, that doesn't sound good. I'm glad that didn't happen in Maryland. Well, unfortunately, those were altered stories of two events that did happen in Maryland. And I think really call into question whether our conflict of interest laws are doing enough. And so I have worked with a number of you and my cross-file in the Senate to bring forward this bill to strengthen our blind trust rules, what is required to go in a blind trust, how quickly a blind trust must be set up for a new governor, and then for investments of a governor that are not appropriate for a blind trust. Some of our governors, including the current one and the prior one, have been quite successful, and they own some things that are not appropriate for a blind trust, strengthening requirements around non-participation agreements and making those public and clear so that members of the public can see when a governor is not supposed to be participating in certain issues, decisions that may affect their investments or the investments of a close relative, all defined in the bill. It would require sending this information to the Board of Public Works secretary so that that person is also aware of what a governor should not be voting on in the Board of Public Works, posting all of this information on the State Ethics Commission website, and also requiring that business interests that are seeking a grant of the state include in their sort of response to bids from the state or bid requests from the state information about whether or not a governor has an ownership interest in them. As you all know, sunshine is the best disinfectant, and so for some of these things, it's going to allow citizens, journalists, and others to sort of see what's going on. In other cases, it's going to clarify the rules and make clear what a governor can and cannot do while they're being governor, because a governor's time should be spent, just as ours is, serving the people of Maryland and not serving their own interests. And we want to remove any actual conflicts of interest or any apparent conflicts of interest. Sometimes governors may not really be doing anything wrong, and these decisions all sort of make a lot of sense, but they don't smell right and they don't look right. And so we want to make it clear that governors shouldn't be doing things that don't smell right and don't look right, but should be following all the rules. So that is the bill, Madam Chair. Happy to hear from the panel or answer any questions as you see fit.
Delegate Morgan.
You know, good voice. Do you believe, I understand where you're coming from with this bill, but do you think the bill should be expanded to other senior persons who are elected within the state?
Yeah, it's a great question, Delegate Morgan, and actually we had a lot of sort of internal discussion about that. I think the governor's power is quite unique in the state of Maryland. The amount of money that they have fairly direct control over, including basically setting the agenda for the Board of Public Works, I think is pretty significant. So I think it does make sense to treat them a little bit differently than we treat other figures, including the Lieutenant Governor, Attorney General, the Comptroller. Obviously, I'll just say, we of course all have strict conflict of interest rules. Frankly, either the next bill or the bill after, I will not be in here because of the conflict of interest rules, right? So we all need to follow the rules. We are a little bit different though as a citizen legislature. Most of us have other jobs, so I think we operate sort of a little bit differently. I think the governor is a unique figure, even among our statewide constitutional officers, so I think it does make sense to treat them a little bit differently and sort of what we expect from them, given the amount of power and responsibility we are handing them. That said, you know, if people really feel strongly that others should be included, I'm very open to that conversation. I just clearly, in my mind, see a big difference between a governor who has a lot of control over a $60+ billion budget and some of these other figures who have important roles, but they don't necessarily have the ability to sort of direct funding that same way. So that's part of the reason I made that difference in the bill.
Thank you.
Delegate Siliberte.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've had a governor in this state for a number of years, and I'm not concerned. I'm just questioning why at this time a conflict of interest has arisen. Has it not arisen over the last 50 years or 75 years?
It sure has, Delegate Siliberte. That's the point of the bill. Those stories I told at the beginning were true events that happened in Maryland. I was sanitizing them for you. And you can read a number of news stories. I think you all know how to Google. Professor Stewart's taught us that much. And you can see some of the events that have taken place and why I think we need to strengthen these laws.
But this is the first time that we've had an opportunity to use the conflict of interest as a bludgeon.
But first of all, Delegate, I would not call it I'm sorry.
A tool, yeah.
As a tool, right. No, of course, we already have a conflict of interest law. This strengthens an existing law. And I will say governors have put their interest in trust, some blind, some not. Previously, this sets some more rules around it and also clarifies when something cannot go into a blind trust. And I think this is actually really important because, again, I don't want to penalize the success of our current or prior governor. They have some interests that can't go in a blind trust. And this bill does not require them to divest those interests, right? Some governors have chosen to do that in other states. The governor of Pennsylvania was a very successful businessman. When he, the prior governor, I should say, when he became governor, he made the decision to divest that business. This bill does not require that, but if they are going to keep their interests, we want to clarify what the rules are around non-participation and things that could affect that business or the interest of that business.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chair, thank you for the bill. I think it's a good bill. I think it's important that we have, as much public information and as much no conflict of interest as possible. I do have a question, though. Does this have any, or could it have any bearing, I should say? I know it does. I know it's aimed at governors right now, but could this reach down at all to county executives? We have, say in Baltimore County, for instance, the county executive is responsible for a $4 billion budget, not to the extent of what you're talking about at the state level, $60-some billion budget, but still not an insignificant amount of money. Obviously, we have other very large counties in Maryland where the county executive also is, or mayor in Baltimore City, where they're responsible for very large budget numbers. And I think it's important in the executive position, because I think you're right, it is different than maybe some other positions. Is there room to kind of make sure that those offices as well are adhering to kind of these sorts of standards?
Sure. So Delegate Naraki, first, I'm glad to see you're making up for missing a couple of days with all the questions today. Really appreciate it. Yeah, look, I sitting here actually don't know what the kind of rules are around the county executives, and we do have, the State Ethics Commission does do a lot related to our local officials, so I'm certainly open to a bill that addresses that. I think we probably want to address it at least with the charter county executives and maybe the mayor of Baltimore City, sort of on a uniform basis. I just don't know enough about sort of how that works currently in the history. Maybe the State Ethics Commission can shed some light upon it. Sounds like a separate bill to me, but again, happy to have that conversation because I generally agree with you. The budget for Montgomery County is larger than many states combined, in fact. And so definitely open to making sure that nothing that shouldn't be happening there is happening.
Sure. Do you all have anything that you could add to that possibly? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
I'm Jennifer Alger. I'm the Executive Director of the State Ethics Commission. This particular bill, because it is specific to a specific state office, would not be something that the State Ethics Commission would require the local governments to also enact, since it is specifically directed at a state official. The local governments, the county governments could do something like that if they felt that that was above and beyond. There are conflict of interest provisions that are applicable to local elected officials, such as a county executive related to certain financial holdings or non-participation requirements already required in the local laws, but not the blind trust.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And just for clarification, Mr. Chair, the bill could address or ask local jurisdictions to maybe look into it, maybe not?
We can always amend bills, as you like to say in your subcommittee. It's
Yes.
the legislative prerogative, so obviously it's the will of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the bill, Chair Corman. It's very important. I'm a little confused about on page 8, paragraph 2, because there are all these double sort of not included, exempted, not exempted, non-participation. The language a little confusing, but I wondered why the need for calling out business before the Board of Public Works. Why is that necessary?
Yeah, because that is first of all, the nice thing about the Board of Public Works is it's a very open process in a sense, right? We all see how the 3 people on the Board of Public Works are voting. So that is one that's kind of easier to regulate than kind of other decisions governors make, right? Governors lots of times get handed memos behind closed doors that none of us will ever see, where they check things and X things, right? Mm-hmm. We're still going to require them to sort of follow the process there and not participate if they're not supposed to. But the Board of Public Works works a little bit differently because that is a public process. We can sort of more clearly regulate that and make sure in a sort of more enforceable way that they're acting as they are supposed to. It's a little bit harder to identify all the other universes where governors make some of these sorts of funding decisions, for example, like awarding grants. But the Board of Public Works, there's a clear agenda, there's a clear voting session. And so we can really use that as a tool to make sure, one, they're not participating there where they're not supposed to. 2, that the secretary of the Board of Public Works is receiving the non-participation agreements so they know when a governor is not supposed to be participating. And frankly, look, people forget things. A governor may not remember that 7 years before when they got in office, they entered a non-participation agreement related to something. The secretary of the Board of Public Works will now have this information and be able to remind them, oh, by the way, Mr. Governor, someday, Ms. Governor, you should not be participating in this, and leave it to the treasurer and the comptroller, or possibly sub and the lieutenant governor make decisions if that's, what's appropriate in that situation.
Okay, that's helpful. And then one more question, Madam Chair, about the penalty piece. So it looks like is it a civil or a criminal penalty? Because it potentially includes jail time, if I'm reading this correctly, correct?
Yeah, I actually think it could be a criminal penalty. I'll leave it to the commission. I should mention something. Thank you for bringing this up. We did have a suggested amendment, actually from the governor's office, related to penalties for not entering the blind trust agreement by the date specified in the bill. And so council's helping with an amendment to do that as well. Those penalties would be more of like a civil penalty type of thing, like the way we pay if you, not that any of us have ever done that, but if you don't get your campaign finance report in, that would be that kind of penalty. I do think violating this law currently could be a criminal offense, right?
There has to be knowing and willful violations, and that would be something that is pursued by the Office of the State Prosecutor.
But it's a misdemeanor, correct? That's what
yes,
it says?
In the law, yes, misdemeanor.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Delegate Otto.
Chair, thank you for bringing this forward, and I appreciate your comments about sunshine does kill a lot in your remarks about this bill. My only concern is I don't see that it's there, but is there anything that would deter good, competent people for pursuing this office now because of this requirement? I mean, that
Yeah, it's hard for me to predict the future and say that some great potential public servant looks at this and says, you know, I really like being able to see all the passive assets in my portfolio, and I like watching it grow, so I don't want to be governor. But if that's the decision they make, unfortunately, Delegate, that's the decision they make. I mean, we ask public servants to make sacrifices. I think we can expect even more from governors than the significant sacrifice you all make. So I don't view this as creating some, again, we're not asking them to divest any business that they have an interest in, which is, again, other people have done. But I don't think this is too much to ask. But I can't tell you that some potential candidate wouldn't look at it and say, that is too much. I
think you answered my question. Okay. Thank you.
Delegate Healy.
Thank you. I really wasn't going to ask any questions. I really tried, but I need to understand this list of restricted individuals and all these relatives, distant relatives, in-laws, outlaws, all of that, and how these folks who, a son-in-law of the governor, for example, I mean, what their business, their private businesses are, what they do with their money, with their property. I could see where there might be a conflict, but I also could see where they might not even speak to each other, and they might have no interest in each other's work at all.
Sure. Well, hopefully they're all speaking to each other, but obviously every family is different. The point of this list is to make clear whose interest you're not supposed to be participating in. And again, unfortunately, there's some history on this where some governors who were speaking to these relatives still felt comfortable allocating money, voting on things that affected those interests. If it's not already in there, I'm happy to add kind of a waiver provision if necessary for the State Ethics Commission to make a determination that the son-in-law is estranged, as some of us are from our in-laws, and the in-law would never want to do anything to help their son-in-law anyway. That occasionally happens with families. Not mine, thank God.
Not mine either.
But if we want to create some kind of waiver provision for that, if it's not already anticipated here. But I think generally, again, it's not just about what is actually a conflict, but what could look to people like a conflict. And again, I think we want to, kind of, Caesar's wife must be above reproach, right? So I think we want to make it
Well, I understand about a spouse. I mean, because you have a lot of interest in common by law, all of that. But the last question, and is kind of the reverse of this. If you have someone who is in a long-term relationship but is not married and does not have any biological or legal connection to the person. We've had a governor who had a hostess who lived in the governor's mansion, and they were never married.
Yeah. A9.
But they're not included in this at all.
I think they are A9, except for an employee of the governor, any individual who resides in the governor's primary residence. So I think in that particular 1980s, early 90s example you're citing, I think that's covered. Look, if they don't live with them, I mean, it does get hard to account for every scenario, but I think that particular one is probably covered by A9.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Just quick point of clarification, Mr. Bill Sponsor. Isn't it so, as a citizens legislature, if I wanted to work somewhere else, I have to get permission from ethics to clear a job to make money?
I am very lucky. I've been in the same job since I was elected here, so I do not know if you particularly have to get clearance that way, but certainly everything we do is subject to a number of ethics laws, and all of us have a meeting on both sides of the aisle with Ethics Council every year to make sure that we are abiding by all of the rules.
Yeah, well, I would say, isn't it so?
Yes.
Any other questions? No? Seeing none, Joanne Anton?
Yes, good afternoon, Vice Chair Boyce and members of the committee. For the record, Joanne Antoine with Common Cause Maryland, testifying in support of House Bill 932. I don't have much to add that the Chair Corman hasn't already covered. I think as an organization that works on ethics, a lot of times we get mail and emails and phone calls from constituents who are concerned about the actions of elected officials. And obviously, the past election cycle and even in 2020, when news broke. I think during my time at Common Cause, that's the most amount of mail that we've received from constituents, right? And it's because, you know, they end up questioning whether or not a sitting governor is working in their own interest and not on their behalf, right? So obviously on our end, we believe that conflicts of interest put your jobs and good policy making in jeopardy, right? So House Bill 932 would help to prevent ethical lapses and more importantly, create more confidence amongst the public. So we'd urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the panel or for the sponsor?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I think that even though they're informational, I think you do have testimony, right?
Yes, again, Jennifer Algar, Executive Director for the State Ethics Commission. We just submitted written informational testimony to the committee. The only thing to highlight really in that for the committee is that there would be a significant operational impact to the State Ethics Commission to make changes to implement the provisions of this bill, and there is a fiscal impact to make those changes there for the commission as well. So I just want to highlight that, but other than that, nothing else to add. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions?
Here's your chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate.
State Public Transit Service and Stations, exclusion of assault and bodily injury.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, my name is Delegate Jackie T. Addison, here urging a favorable report on HB 1144, State Public Transit Service and Station, exclusion for assault and bodily injury. According to the Federal Transit Administration, a major event occurrence of an assault on a transit worker is defined as an event resulting in a fatality or injury requiring medical transport. According to the National Transit Database, last year in 2024, there were 33 major event occurrences of assault reported to the FTA from WMATA and the MTA. Non-major event data, i.e. no one had to go to the hospital, includes 191 physical assaults on transit operators in 2024 at WMATA, MTA, Mark Ride On, and Prince George's County, the bus. The same data includes 204 assaults on the transit workers, i.e. transit station managers and employees. The reportable threshold for assaults on transit workers have grown 121% according to data from the NTD nationwide. The Urban Institute, however, puts that number at nearly 300% from 168 events in 2008 to 492 events in 2022. This is a problem, one that is solvable with the correct policy in place. This bill will do just that. HB 1144 mandates an individual who commits assaults or other acts of bodily harm against a public transit operator or passenger will be prohibited from utilizing the bus, rail, light rail, or the subway for a period of time. HB 1144 will not increase incarceration rates, yet make working conditions safer for transit workers and traveling conditions safer for passengers throughout the state. I encourage the Environment and Transportation Committee to give HB 1144 a favorable report. And I also have some amendments that we will be putting in as well.
Chair Corman and members of my favorite committee, House ENT. Hello, my name is David Pendleton. I'm the director for the Maryland Safety and Legislative Board for the Transportation Division of SMART. We are the train union, and I'm here today urging an unfavorable report for HB 1144, State Public Transit Service and Stations, exclusion for assault and bodily injury. SMART's first responsibility is to ensure a safe working environment for our members. Assault is a terrible crime that is perpetrated on its victims without regard for their race, sex, age, or religion. More often than not, assaults on conductors stem from us saying two small words: ticket, please. It is the simplest of our duties that comes with the most issues. Often when this happens, an assault happens on a MARC train, the perpetrator is allowed to catch the very next train. More often than not, we will see that same perpetrator that afternoon on our train, and we will see them again the next day and the next day. HB 1144 will put a stop to this injustice. It will hold perpetrators of assault accountable for their actions by taking away the privilege of utilizing public transit service. Passage of this bill will send a clear message that the state wants a safer public transit service for its workers and commuters. This common sense legislation is passed in Virginia, Illinois, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, California, Georgia, Florida, and here locally in Montgomery County. It is time for the state of Maryland to join this list to make the commute to work safer for the riding public. Thank you for your time and consideration of our position. Please vote favorably, HB 1144.
Mr. Chair Corman, members, Vice Chair, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. I'm Michael McMillan. I'm President Business Agent for Amalgamated Transit Union Local 1300. I represent over 3,000 employees of the Maryland Transit Administration. That's on bus operations, rail operations, bus maintenance, and rail maintenance. It is our members who move the state of Maryland every single day, 24 hours, 7 days a week. What comes along with that responsibility is they're the frontline employees. They're the first ones that the public see in which they take out their aggressions and frustrations on those employees that they see first when the transit system is late, when it doesn't show up, or if they are because of their own faults, they're late for work or has been fired or anything. They're the first ones to get dumped on. With that comes the assaults. Can you imagine being a bus operator, just coming to work to do your job, but coming in fear because the same person that has given you attitude, arguments, and may have even assaulted you, you have to see them over and over again because nothing has been done. Had one one member who was spat on. This person also spat on several other operators. 10 years later, but they found out that this person, why she was spitting on operators, she knew she was HIV positive. Can you imagine being called down after this person passed away and saying, hey, you know that assault that happened to you 10 years ago? The person was HIV positive. You need to get yourself checked out. I've been with MTA for 30 years. I've been a victim of assaults. And that's why I'm here today to ask you to please strongly give a favorable support and for HB 1144. We also have members here today who will testify also who have actually had assaults occurred to them. So thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is James Smith Jr. I'm the local president of ASME, Local 1859. We represent the police and civilian workers within the Maryland Transit Police Department. I'm here in support of Bill 1144. This legislation takes a reasonable approach to making transit services and stations safer. The bill requires MDOT to establish policy that bans or excludes individuals from MTA services who commit assaults against passengers or transit workers, either on or near transit vehicles. The bill says that the first offense is a 30-day ban Second offense is a 180-day ban. And the third offense will result in a lifetime ban. As a police officer for the agency, my primary goal is to maintain safety and security. When passengers continue to violate MTA policies, we must have the tools available to deal with those situations when they arise. Violence against bus operators is on the increase. We don't track those violators. The legislation will allow us to track who is violating our policies and address issues with people who are continuing to violate them. Our number one goal is transporting patrons safely. This bill allows us an important tool to do so. I urge the committee to provide a favorable report on HB 1144.
Delegate, do you have other members of your panel before we take any questions? Or should we go ahead and take questions, if there are any?
I'm sorry, they can take questions.
Great. Start with Delegate Guyton.
Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you so much for the work that you do. It is hard, it is important, and I know that we all really, really appreciate you and the fact that you're putting yourself out there. I would love to see something like this pass. I do have a question about one provision, and maybe I just haven't studied it enough. My concern is whether or not you're banning folks who have just alleged, it has been alleged that they've assaulted someone who is driving the bus, or whether they have to have been convicted of that.
Delegate, it will be alleged.
Okay.
For the record, anytime one of our members are assaulted, we call the police. So the police come straight there. So it's not as though we can just say, hey, you hit me, and then you're allowed to leave. No, the police are actually going to be coming, and there's no way we can lie about it, if that's your concern.
Thank you. Actually, that was my concern. It was that there would be a record and there could not be any sort of, disagreement between folks or discrimination of any kind. I still do have a little bit of concern about folks with disabilities, and maybe that's something that we can all talk about offline.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Also, to add to that, to your question, we investigate with the police department all of those complaints, which means all video evidence and everything's thoroughly investigated before the charges are passed through. So, everything's looked at prior to, from the beginning to the end. And then the recommendations are made, how to proceed forward.
Thank you. Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Delegate Addison and the union brothers on the panel for bringing this bill forward. I think it's really, really important that our transit operators and personnel feel safe. My question is, how does this, and I confess, I'm not that familiar with the law in Montgomery County, but how does this integrate with criminal law? So, for example, assault is a criminal, and we just heard testimony from the police officer that every assault is investigated, so you can verify that it's not just some frivolous claim. So would that person then be charged and barred for 30 days, for example? How would it work?
So essentially, Delegate Foley, this bill has no requirement that the person be charged with assault. That's a separate issue that's dealt with the district attorney's office, and so in that way, it's just once it's been confirmed that you did assault a public transit operator, at that point, that's when the ban goes into effect for the first offense being 30, second one being 6 months, and the third time for life, or if you used a weapon, which I do have members here who will come in and testify to that.
Right.
But no, this does not call for criminal justice. We're trying to create a safe work environment. The criminal justice aspect, that's a different department who will handle that, or a different aspect of state law, rather.
Okay, so no matter what's going on in the court system, in the criminal justice system, if it's been determined that that person committed an assault, they're banned?
That is correct, yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Delegate Ziegler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, I echo Delegate Guyton's thanks, and shocking that this is such an issue. But my question is, how do you enforce it? Do you have like a most wanted list, or how, like how would a bus driver know?
Well, first thing I'm going to say, if I've also been assaulted on the train, and you all know me pretty well. I'm a pretty nice guy, but even I've had to. You don't forget who attacked you. That's number one. Number two, people are creatures of habit. They tend to want to catch the same train, ride the same bus, get to work around the same time, if it's indeed someone who's commuting to work. That's number one. Number two, I can speak for the train. My brother, President Mike Millen, can speak for the bus, but on the train, first thing that will happen is that person will be investigated. Their pictures will be distributed into our location where we have our job briefings. So we're actually going to see the picture. We're going to talk about that person. We're going to be on the lookout for that person. And from there, once we identify them, that's when we will call the police and say, hey, this person's on this train. This person is banned, needs to be removed immediately. That's basically how it works, and then my friend will talk about the bus.
Okay. So right now, there's a public narrative. I've been in transit for 30 years with Maryland Transit Administration. 15 years as a bus operator, 7 years as a train operator, and then my rest of the years as a full-time union representative. But right now, the public gets on the transit system. They thumb their nose if they are a repeat offender or an offender who's assaulted a bus operator. They thumb their nose at the operators and say, hey, I got away with it, and I can still catch a transit system. You know, and this is one way that will curtail them to say, hey, if they knew that they were on a ban, they'll be discreet, quiet. It's hard, really hard to enforce it throughout the transit system because the bus operators aren't police officers. But it will make that person think twice before they speak up, do anything. And this is not only for the protection of the bus operators, but even to the passengers that's on the bus as well.
So you will have seen pictures before you get on the bus or have them with you on the bus. So if somebody gets on your bus who you know is an offender, you can do something about it.
Right. Yeah, and they'll be able to, they have handheld radios there on the bus where they're able to call BOC, Bus Operation Control Center, who can directly call the police to let them know that, you know, a person who's been banned is on the bus at this time.
Thank you.
Delegate Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate Addison, for bringing this important bill, and to all your panelists. I can testify that Mr. Pendleton is a great conductor on the MARC train and always welcomes passengers with professionalism. Thank you all, Mr. McMillan, Ms. Schmidt, thank you. My question has to do with the impact of uncontrolled sort of social disorder and these assaults on the recruitment and retention of transit workers. And I wonder, Delegate or whoever is best to answer, if you think passage of this bill will improve conditions so that we can recruit and retain transit workers to keep folks working in this field.
Yes. Yes, Delegate Lewis, absolutely.
That was easy. Anyone else?
Yes, I would definitely say so. Right now, one of the fears with the new hires that come in, they hear about the assault, they see it on TV as well. Right now, the first question is asked when they come to orientation class, oh, can I carry my gun on the bus? They already know, no, you cannot do it. They said, well, what do I have to protect myself? And as the president, you know, sometimes that's my shameful period. I'm like, you know, actually nothing. You know, they bring up the Marcus Park situation, in which you may be familiar with, where the bus operator was shot 13 times for trying to retrieve his bag that somebody took from him. He didn't have anything to protect himself, and he wasn't trying to. He just wanted his belongings back. But when they hear about these things that happen, oh, by the way, too, that person was on the lookout by the MTA police because he had put a gun in another person's face just months prior to. But yet he was still able, because it was not a ban or nothing was out on him, or, you know, for his face or recognition or anything, that he was allowed to continue to get on from bus to bus until that happened. But I mean, I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, you did. Mr. Chairman, as a quick follow-up, will there be, I don't think the bill refers to this specifically, but will there be signage messaging information on transit vehicles explaining that this ban exists and what the implications are?
Yes, ma'am. That's a very good question. So first off, later on in the bill, further down from where you're reading, it says that the MTA will produce regulations to carry out this bill. And part of what they will do is create a code of conduct where it will have that information posted on the train, similar to the way Section 705 is displayed on trains now. So yes, ma'am, the answer to your question is yes, there will be, and the MTA will do so.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Long.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and solidarity to my union brothers, and good to see you. Delegate Addison, thank you for bringing this very important bill. I wanted to piggyback off of Delegate Guyton's question, but I wanted to ask it from a different perspective, and if it's best offline, let me know. But the issue of disabilities, and more specifically, the invisible disability, mental health, sometimes there are individuals that don't intend to, act out in certain ways, right? But unfortunately, they do. And with that being said, they are consequently banned from the train if this bill were to go into effect. What do you envision being a perfect scenario for folks that are in that realm? Should their guardians be made aware? How do you envision that playing out in a perfect scenario for those that have disabilities or they're struggling with mental health issues that cause them to act out, and they perhaps are at points been a menace to society in certain respects, just to be kind of frank?
Can I follow up with you on that?
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, I do not see any additional questions. Thank you, Delegate Addison, you and your panel. We have a couple more in-person favorable. Shantice Robinson, ATU Local 1300, and Cheryl Austin, ATU Local 1300. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Hello, Chairman and Committee. My name is Shantice Robinson. I work at MTA, Northwest Bus Division. I've been there for 8 years. July the 21st, a passenger aborted my bus, started putting his head over my shield, licking his tongue. He was supposed to have been paying his fare. That's all he's supposed to have been doing. But then he reached his arm behind my shield. He grabbed my drink and had a straw, started drinking it. He went in the bag, took a seat. I got off the bus, went inside the subway station, and I started to call BOCC. Once I called BOCC, letting them know, the passenger went back behind my shield, stole my sweater, took the drink, and tried to hop on the train. MTA police came. They stopped the trains. They came. They gave him a citation and let him go. 2 days later, I seen I'm in the city. The first time it was in the county. 2 days later, I seen somebody running for the bus. So I stopped. I waited. I didn't know it was the same gentleman from 2 days ago until he jumped up on the bus. When he jumped up on the bus, he looked at me and he said, "You look like you seen a ghost. I know who you are. You know who I am. I took your shit the other day. What you want to do about it?" So at this point, I'm already freaking out on the inside because I'm like, he remembered me from the 2 days ago. In our communities, when you call the police, people try to retaliate. So he sits behind my bus. I'm on the phone with the control center, and I'm telling control, like, this person is back on my bus. They says to me, "Stop the bus." I'm not stopping the bus in the middle of nowhere where it take however to get to me. He sees me on the phone. He comes up the front, putting his hands all in his pockets, asking me, did I call the police? At this point, I'm still in and out, picking people up, nobody paying to get on the bus. I'm terrified on the inside. I didn't know how afraid I was until the police came and removed him off the bus. I wound up having an anxiety attack. My blood pressure went up high. I had to go to the hospital, and I know the timer went off. Months later, this same person sees me, try to get on my bus. I don't open the doors for him this time, so he stands in front of my bus like he has a gun for like 3 minutes. The light turned red or green about 3 or 4 times, saying, "Bitch, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you when I catch you. You ain't going to let me on the bus?" He proceeded to walk around on the side of my window, trying to pull my window open while my hand was on the steering wheel, my foot was on the brake. I'm still freaking out on the inside. How many times do he got to tell me he's going to kill me before he do so? You know, anyway, I want to thank y'all for listening. It was more to everything, but I wasn't safe. I wasn't safe. I was out of work for 6 weeks because I had to get a peace order for an unknown person. The same person, I went to court, they gave him a year probation, 6 months. I mean, a year probation, he had to stay 100 feet away from me after we went to court. 3 weeks later, he turned around and ran into her. I'm sorry.
I can go.
Thank y'all for listening.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and delegates. I, Sherelle Austin, bus operator for the Maryland Department of
She said,
Transportation.
come on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and delegates. I, Sherelle Austin, bus operator for the Maryland Department of Transportation. I had a recent encounter with the same passenger. That has been a problem on numerous occasions. This particular day, this passenger did not want to comply with the bus safety rules by standing in the driver's area with blowing smoke in my direction while I was operating the coach. Once he exited the bus, he went into a rage of anger by destroying the property of the bus, hitting the mirror, knocking it down, taking the bus bike rack, slamming it, breaking it. He proceeded to kick at the door once the doors were shut, trying to enter back on the coach. With rage, he then proceeds to go to retrieve a dog on the opposite side of the street, coming back to the driver's side door, sending verbal threats of what he was going to have the dog to attack me. He then started threatening me with harm of shooting me. Then he comes around to my driver's side window, pulling and tugging at the window while displaying a knife in his hand. He proceeded to do all these things until MTA police presence was there. Once police presence was there, police then comes to my door. I tell him he might want to be aware that this guy has a knife. He turns around to the guy. Then the guy displays all his anger and direct all his anger towards the police. Thank you for listening to my concerns, and I urge the committee to issue a favorable report on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you both for sharing your experiences, and I'm sorry we and our predecessors have not done more to prevent this from happening to you. Are there questions for this panel? Okay, thank you all. We do have a few favorable amendment witnesses. Charlie Scott, WMATA, Jay Johnson, Smart Transportation Division, Trina Few, Smart Transportation Division, Brian Perry, Smart Transportation Division, and Tom Cahill. That's one more name than there are seats, so just do a little rotation. Just go ahead.
All right, Chair Corman and Vice Chair Boyce, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Charlie Scott here for WMATA. I'm here to urge a strong favorable report with amendment on House Bill 1144. I thank Delegate Addison for sponsoring this legislation and for offering sponsor amendments. I do have some additional clarifying amendments to make it clear that this bill should apply to all transit systems in our state. At Metro, the fares that we charge and the rules governing our customers are governed by a tariff that is passed by our board of directors. As part of our annual safety update, actually to our board safety committee in January, this actual policy to ban repeat offenders in our system was recommended as an industry best practice. Right now, we are conducting a peer analysis to inform such a policy, and we'll bring this back to our board of directors for consideration and action this spring. As with our board, our focus, as shared with our board, our focus is going to be on offenders who have committed sex offenses and offenders who have committed assault against Metro employees. Having this policy in state statute will further reinforce the message that for the safety of our customers and the safety of our employees, egregious offenders have no place in our system. My written testimony does give more details on the amendments that we're recommending, but basically, where the bill references state public transit, we're recommending that it just say public transit. and then also the reference to transit administered by the state of Maryland, just recommending that that reference be deleted from the bill. So for the reasons stated, recommend, again, a favorable report with amendment, and thank you.
Mind pulling them? Charlie, can you just help him with the mic? Put the mic towards him. Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you.
Chairman Corman, members of the House of the ENT Committee, hello, my name is Brian Perry. I'm a railroader with 26 years of service, working in many capacities. I am a member of the Transportation Division of SMART and have been for the last 15 years. I have worked as a conductor for both Amtrak and MARC. I'm here today urging a favorable report of HB 1144. While boarding passengers in West Baltimore station stop, a man walked up to my fellow conductor, told him that he did not have a ticket and he was going to board the train. At which point, my fellow conductor told him that he needed a ticket for a ride. The man became quarrelsome, grabbed my coworker by the shirt, knocked him into the stairs of the train, and drug him into the train. I then grabbed him from behind, removing him off of my coworker. Together, we were able to restrain him until he calmed down. A third member of our crew got help from MTA police. We both sustained injuries and missed months of work. While he was arrested, in this instance, charges were not pressed. This doesn't happen most of the time. Usually the attackers are removed from one train, then allowed to board the next train. Imagine someone walking into this building today or this morning and doing the same to you or another coworker, and being able to do it again and again and again. Please try to imagine that. We face this scenario every day. This bill would ensure accountability. It would make trains safer for both us and our passengers. It will be a deterrent to would-be attackers, knowing there will be consequences for their acts. I am certain that everyone wants a safe environment to work in. This bill would do this for us. Thank you for your time and consideration. I urge favorable for the report. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm sorry. Good morning, good afternoon, Chairman Corman and members of the House Committee. My name is Jay Johnson. I am a conductor with Amtrak for 15 years and the MARC service. I am urging today for a favorable report for HB 1144. While working on a MARC train stopped in West Baltimore, I was accosted by a man with whom I had repeated problems with. I was struck by a blunt object in the back of my head and neck, and I was taken to the hospital where I received 3 staples in the back of my head. This assault left me out of work for 9 months. Not only was I physically bruised, but I was emotionally scarred, and I'm still traumatized to this day. For 2 years, I sought psychiatric help from a licensed therapist. Additionally, I had to have plastic surgery to make the scar in the back of my head seem less gruesome, but you can still see where the scar is visible. I still see the man occasionally on the train, and the residual effects is still with me to this day. I dread the thought of running into him again, and this bill 1144 will prevent him from riding on MARC trains ever again. I ask that you please spare victims of assault from the pain of having to relive their trauma by seeing the ones who attack them every day. There are hundreds of transit workers who were assaulted last year simply by doing their jobs. 1144 will provide a measure of protection for us. It will create a safe environment for public transit commuters as well as for us. Thank you for your consideration. I urge for a favorable report. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the House and ENT Committee. Hello, my name is Trina Few. I am a member of the Transportation Division of SMART. I work as a conductor for Amtrak and MARC with 13 years of service. I am urging a favorable report on HB 1144. While working on an Amtrak train in Wilmington, Delaware, a woman running down the platform came to me and asked, "Is this my train?" I replied to her, no, this is not your train. We do not accept passengers at this location. We only let them off. She immediately became belligerent, swearing, cursing at me. She even spit on me. A conductor from another train located across the platform from me radioed for police assistance. Being that the attack was unprovoked, if it weren't for him being there, I'm certain things would have escalated further. As a Maryland resident, I fully support HB 1144. The commuting public utilizing public transit service depends on us to get them to and from safely. When people feel that they can get away with doing anything they want, lawlessness takes hold, at which point it becomes impossible to do our jobs. We as a state must send the message that riding public transit service is a privilege, one that should not be abused, one that should be protected. Victims of assault should not have to face their attackers day after day, as is currently the case. Thank you for your time and consideration. I urge a favorable report.
Thank you so much. What was your name at the end?
Brian Perry.
Okay. And then I guess we're Tom Cahill.
Unfortunately, Madam Chair, he's in economic matters. We had a bill, and
That's
he's
no,
there.
that's no problem. We'll just take questions at this time. Delegate Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very briefly, I'm not sure if it's protocol, whoever can answer best. Is this going to be retroactive for, and if this has been stated, I apologize.
No, sir. It will not. It will
Okay,
not.
thank you.
What's the follow-up on that if there is someone who would offend after this, who's a past offender, would then be subject, and then you could probably take care of.
Once the law is in effect, yes, absolutely. But it would not go back and retroactively try to hunt down everyone who.
That's fair.
Yes,
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? Okay, I think seeing none, that ends the bill hearing for HB 1144. We will now move to the final bill of the day, HB 958, Railroads Safety Requirements, Maryland Railway Safety Act of 2025. Mr. Chair, I understand your first panel is Mr. Darby, Mr. Pendleton, and Mr. Cahill, who apparently is in economic matters.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. Okay, that's fine.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. This bill is a variation on a theme that you've heard from me for a number of years. It's railway safety. And in fact, this bill, which we're calling the Maryland Railway Safety Act, has several provisions that will make our railways and communities much safer. Last year in the U.S., there were more than 2,000 collisions at highway rail crossings, resulting in 252 fatalities and 653 injuries. Also last year, there were more than 26,000 reports of trains blocking highway rail crossings, sometimes for hours at a time. And in a quarter of those incidents, first responders, including ambulances that were trying to get to hospitals, were unable to get through. In 27% of these incidents, pedestrians were observed climbing on, over, and even under the stopped train in an effort to cross to the other side of the blocked tracks. Unfortunately, some of those cross-throughs resulted in limbs being severed and lives lost. So that means there were nearly 13,000 reported cases of a life being risked because a train was blocking a highway rail crossing. So two provisions of this bill would go far in mitigating these issues. One prohibits a train from blocking rail crossings for more than 5 minutes, and the second limits trains to a length of 8,500 feet, which is about 1.6 miles. Now, I'm sure we all remember that terrible accident, East Palestine, back in 2023. That serves as a powerful reminder as to why rail safety needs to be taken very seriously. That derailment was caused by an overheated wheel bearing that was not detected by the equipment then in use. A provision in this bill would require wayside detector systems to be installed, operated, and maintained according to guidelines issued by the Federal Railroad Administration. And these guidelines would have prevented that derailment from happening. First responders who fought the ensuing fire in East Palestine were not wearing proper PPE, personal protective equipment, because they initially did not know that the train was carrying dangerous, hazardous material. Now, about the two-person crew requirement, about which I've had legislation several times. The language in this bill is very similar on the two-person crew requirement to the bills this committee and the House has passed 5 times: 2017, 2018, 2019, 2021, and 2023. Accompanying my testimony are several expressions of local support for the bill from the cities of Cumberland and Baltimore and Anne Arundel, Baltimore, and Prince George's counties, which passed resolutions of support. One final point. Last year, the Federal Railroad Administration, or FRA, issued a rule that established minimum safety requirements for the size of train crews. Per the FRA press release at the time, the new rule enhanced safety in the rail industry by generally requiring and emphasizing the importance and necessity of a second crew member on all trains. As such, the provision that's in my bill that deals with the two-person crew issue would only take effect if that federal rule were to be revoked. With that, I urge a favorable report.
Well, go ahead, Matt. You want to go? Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to speak as a proponent of HB 958. My name is Matt Darby. I'm an attorney. I practice primarily here in the state of Maryland, but I also am designated legal counsel for the Smart Transportation Division. And as such, I represent railroad workers who suffer work-related injuries under the Federal Employers Liability Act, as well as railroaders who have suffered an adverse action because of a safety-related issue under the 2007 amendments to the Federal Rail Safety Act that created essentially a whistleblower provision. So this bill is obviously focused on safety. There is, certainly efforts by the railroads to be safe. However, I can tell you from personal experience, there are multiple situations where they fall far short of their aspirational goal. With respect to the Federal Rail Safety Act, I could probably share some, and the whistleblower provisions share some really harrowing stories of some of the things that railroads have done to their employees when they report safety-related conditions. So the point of that is that safety is still something that states, such as Maryland, have a vested interest, and it's their sovereign responsibility to make sure that that their citizens are safe. Now, we play that against federal preemption. That issue is raised by the opponents of the bill on a regular basis. That's essentially based on preemption in general. The 3R Act, which dealt with Conrail, and the role of the Surface Transportation Board. Because my time is limited, I would suggest just a reading of Larry Mann's submission. Larry was the principal drafter of the Federal Rail Safety Act and lays out the counter argument to the preemption and other points very well. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Boyce and members of the committee. My name is Tom Cahill. I'm a 29-year employee of CSX, currently working as a locomotive engineer out of Baltimore. CSX's moniker is safety first. We believe this should be the policy and goal of the entire rail industry. With that policy and goal in mind, I'm here urging a favorable report on HB 958. I'd like to highlight a railroad accident that occurred in East Palestine, Ohio. On February 3rd, 2023, a 151-car Norfolk Southern freight train carrying a large quantity of hazardous materials derailed in East Palestine because of a burnt journal bearing. 38 cars derailed, many of them carrying hazardous materials. 5 contained vinyl chloride, a highly flammable toxin, which caught fire and spewed toxic chemicals into the air that forced residents to be evacuated for over a 2-mile area. To date, over $1.7 billion has been spent for cleanup efforts, temporarily relocation, and claims. The bill's purpose is to establish a state-mandated minimum threshold of requirements that hold railroads to the highest and most modern methods of monitoring freight trains that move through our communities and towns. The proposed bill would require railroads to employ closer spacing and utilize the most state-of-the-art wayside detection systems to monitor multiple aspects of freight trains and ensure that the railroad employees are properly trained on how to respond to alerts from wayside detectors and evaluate their findings in the field. Railroads will also employ the most current methods of tracking, wherein their wayside detector systems would monitor a train as it traveled over multiple detectors, measuring bearing temperature readings against prior detectors to alert train crews of potential rising readings on recurring axles that could signal a hot or burnt journal. These proposed regulations are of paramount importance to ensure the safe movement of trains in our state and protect our citizens and environment from a similar tragic derailment like that which occurred in East Palestine, Ohio. I urge a favorable report on HB 958. Thank you.
Chair Boyce and members of the committee, again, my name is Brian Perry. I'm a conductor with 26 years of railroad experience. Here today urging a favorable report on HB 958, the Maryland Railway Safety Act of 2025. Today I'm going to touch on the provision mandating the establishment and maintenance of reporting system for the transportation of hazardous material and waste by rail in the state. ACE first responders did a survey in March 2023 for the Pennsylvania DOT following East Palestine's derailment. 114 first responders completed it. Of the 114 who responded, only 15 wore a mask and would have been protected if they would have known the dangerous effect of vinyl chloride that was in the air. Despite both the FAST Act and the Infrastructure Jobs Act of 2021 requiring Class 1 railroads transporting hazardous material to generate accurate real-time information about trains' contents for distribution to first responders in the event of emergency, the Class 1 still have not fully complied. Since 2014, Class 1 railroads have been used the app AskRail to provide the information. However, it has limits like all apps do. It requires internet connection. Most of the rural areas trains operate through have unreliable internet service, oftentimes making the app useless. First responders who were on the scene did not have access to this app. Norfolk Southern did not immediately provide the consist information. Per Kevin Reardon, Fire Marshal of Ohio, firefighters probably didn't even know where extremely hazardous substances were in the air. Typically, in major disasters, firefighters do not exactly know what they're getting into, and then most likely, the first responders did not know about the chemicals. This information they could have got from the engineer of the train or the conductor. Please consider the lives of our first responders in these disasters. I urge a favorable report.
Just 1 second. I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Okay. If we have 2 more witnesses, Madam Chair, so if we could go ahead and, sure. Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon, Chair Boyce and members of the committee. Again, my name is Trina Few. I'm a 13-year railroad employee, currently working as a conductor. The first listed goal in the state rail plan is to enhance the safety and security of Maryland's multimodal transportation system and to provide a transportation system that is resilient to natural and man-made disasters. With the goal in mind, I'm urging a favorable report on HB 958, the Maryland Railway Safety Act of 2025. I'd like to take this time here to highlight a railroad accident that occurred in Weyauwega, Wisconsin. A freight train containing hazardous material derailed just outside of this Wisconsin town. 30 cars derailed containing liquid petroleum and sodium hydroxide, which caused fire. The conductor on the derailed train served as the first responder, an incident commander before the fire department and emergency services arrived on scene. He prevented a greater tragedy by acting quickly, separating the non-derailed cars from the fire engulfed the derailed cars. On arrival, the fire department's chief concern was that the train would explode. They quickly determined that the town's 2,200 residents had to be evacuated. The residents were notified they had to immediately evacuate, leaving their homes and belongings behind. This wasn't an orderly evacuation. Imagine being in your home with your family and having a firefight in front of your house yelling, "Evacuate now." The residents didn't know where to go when they returned, nor could ask any questions about what was going on. If this happened in Baltimore, Hyattsville, Cumberland, or any other densely populated community that freight trains operate through in Maryland, it'd be catastrophic. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jay Johnson. Once again, I'm a conductor with 15 years service. I'm here today urging for a favorable report on HB 958, the Maryland Railway Safety Act of 2025. I'll be touching on two provisions of the MRSA that will resolve many of the public grade crossing issues plaguing the state and the country. Many of the nuisance and public safety problems commonly reported at crossings such as Old Town and Washington Grove crossings in Gaithersburg, Decatur Street crossing in Hyattsville, and the Rosedale crossing in Baltimore would be resolved by passage of block crossing the train length provisions of this bill. These provisions prohibit railroads from blocking at grade rail crossings for more than 5 minutes unless boarding or detraining passengers, and limits train lengths to no longer than 8,500 feet. These long trains often block multiple crossings at one time. Trains that are 2 miles or longer blocking multiple crossings stifle the flow of commerce by preventing traffic to flow from one side of town to the other. They prevent first responders from being able to save lives and property quickly, sometimes blocking them completely. Young school-age children have been filmed climbing through, under, and over these trains, blocking rail crossings. These trains can move at any time, seriously hurting or killing these babies. The act would apply a reasonable restriction on train lengths and block crossings.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Mr. Pendleton, are you testifying, sir?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, I am.
We're ready for
Promise
you
to be
whenever
brief.
you're ready, sir.
Hey, listen, talking before ENT, if it's wrong, I don't want to be right. That's right, that's right. For the record, my name is David Pendleton. I'm the director of the Maryland Safety and Legislative Board for the Transportation Division of SMART. My first responsibility is to ensure our members have a safe workplace, and I'm here today urging a favorable report for HB 958, the Maryland Railway Safety Act of 2025. This is proactive safety rail legislation aimed at addressing several safety issues concerning rail operations in the state of Maryland. Oftentimes, the argument heard against this bill is the investment concerning the Howard Street Tunnel and harming the Port of Baltimore's competitiveness. The Howard Street Tunnel project cost $450 million. In Lac-Mégantic, Canada, a tragic derailment happened. Runaway train went into town, blew the town up, killed 47 people. If the derailment in East Palestine in Ohio, a town that only had 2,200 residents at the time, if it cost Norfolk Southern $1.7 billion, how much do you think it would cost if this happened in Baltimore City? According to data from Urban Footprinting, 52,000 people were affected within 10 miles. If that expands out to 25 miles, that number multiplies by 10 to 585,000 people. California and New York State, the home of first, second, and third busiest ports in America. both passed, two-man. It hasn't hurt not one bit of commerce flowing in and out of those ports, and nor will it in Baltimore because we already have two persons on every train coming in and out. Let's not put corporate profits ahead of public safety. Please remember something. When railroads go oops, communities go boom. It's just that simple. Thank you. I urge a favorable report.
Well, oops. Delegate Foley, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Stein, for bringing this bill back in an even more robust form. And I also want to commend you for the provisions in the bill that allow the union to make sure that their members are safe and that they're not just getting lip service here. So that's great. But I do have a couple questions, I think, for the sponsor, if I may, Madam Chair. My first question is about blocking the railroad grade crossings, which I think is a great idea, and not allowing that for more than 5 minutes. Is there any provision in the bill to allow for circumstances beyond the control of the railroad? So, for example, if there was something blocking the tracks and the train had to stop, or there was an accident and the train had to stop, is there anything in the bill that kind of gives dispensation for that, or not?
No, ma'am, it doesn't. And part of the reason is because the railroads have the ability to not block a crossing. With two persons on every train, the conductor can get down and make the split and free up that rail crossing.
Okay.
So as far as we're concerned, there is no reason for it to be out of their control.
Okay, thank you for that. And my second question is about the two-man crew. And it's more from the fiscal note. There is quite a bit of discussion in the fiscal note that in the event if Maryland, I mean, this is already federal law. We know federal law probably, well, I wouldn't say probably, but could change and get rid of this regulation. But it does say that if Maryland modifies its law or regulation, and it talks about mandating a crew increase, and then says that MTA has to reimburse CSX if the costs are above a certain amount. Now, I assume that it is in the collective bargaining agreement that there's two-man crews, right?
Yes, ma'am. And that's exactly why the state of Maryland will never have to cut that check.
Okay. Well, here's my question, though. So I understand that, and I appreciate that. But if the federal government got rid of the two-man crew and then a required, really one man or one person crew, and then Maryland had the regulation for the two-man crew, would that kick in then?
Again, no, ma'am, and that's because of the collective bargaining agreement. The paragraph reads that CSX would have to show that they got a collective bargaining agreement in place that's removing the second person from off of the crew. I can assure you that before SMART would willingly agree to that, well, carry an umbrella because you need to be on the lookout for droppings from flying pigs.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Delegate Ziegler.
Madam Chair, so my question is for the sponsor. On page 3 of the bill, it says that the commissioner shall establish and maintain a reporting system regarding the transportation of hazardous materials, but that the information may not be provided to the public and is not subject to disclosure under the Public Information Act. Can you say something about why?
I'll make an effort, but then I'll ask David to confirm or clarify what I said. Because information about hazardous materials may be proprietary. So that is my guess is the reason why for that language. But David, if you could confirm.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. That is indeed the case. And just from a security standpoint, hazardous materials, they go boom. So we certainly wouldn't want that kind of information available to the public in a way knowing that it could possibly be a target of terror or something going through the communities. So that's why it's not accessible to the public. It's only accessible to those who actually need it.
Even after the fact?
Well, after the fact, that information is normally made public by the NTSB.
Okay, because it says it would be given to the Maryland Department of Emergency Management and also to FEMA, but there have been discussions of FEMA maybe going away.
That would indeed be very tragic. I would certainly hate to see that. They do phenomenal work in communities that's been ravaged by so many natural disasters that's affecting us now, as well as train derailments. So certainly we hate to see that. But again, that information is normally made public by the NTSB report.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Morgan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're going to have to help me here a little bit. If I go to page 2 of the bill, it says the crew of at least 2. Now, we battled back here a couple of years ago to get 2. So you're saying now we might have a little caveat here to get more than 2?
No, sir, the bill doesn't call for that. It's strictly 2 persons.
So at least 2, but not 3.
Well, if the railroad would be so generous as to put a 3rd person on the train, we're certainly not going to get in their way. But no, we're only asking for 2 person.
Okay, thank you. Then on the same page in line 24, the 8,500 fit rule, and I'm going back to where Delegate Philly came from. I'm a DOD guy, so I look at airplanes, not brains. Could you tell me how this split thing works, that, you know, got a train 8,500 feet long and it's traveling along and something blocks it, and then, you know, half a mile back a box intersection and it's held up for 15 minutes and you get fined. So how does it work that if something happens up here and a half mile back, something happens?
Sure. Delegate Morgan.
Tom.
So what we have when we go down the road, regardless of train length, we have the ability to cut between every single car of that train if it was necessary to free up a crossing, to allow passage of personnel, to make it easier to access any part of the railroad itself or an incident or a location where something happened. An employee on the ground can connect and disconnect those cars as needed at any point in the body of the train to enable response to a situation where it would be a block crossing after a derailment, striking a trespasser, striking a vehicle at a crossing, any one of those things that would potentially block a crossing, causing traffic, restricting the ability of first responders to arrive. A ground transportation employee, the 2nd person of that crew, would be there as fast as they could walk back to where the incident occurred and be able to split or cut that crossing, as we call it.
So they basically decouple the train there and then move the train accordingly to allow traffic to get through the intersection, as David said, from one side of town to the other.
Yes.
Okay. I'm learning. So I'm going to go back to the fiscal note commentary that was made before, and I don't quite understand a couple things here. On page 6 or so, it talks about Maryland Labor advised that they need to procure a database regarding transportation of materials, blah, 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 may exceed $2.5 million over a 5-year period. I'd like to know what kind of beautiful database costs $500,000 a year to build. Remember, I do airplanes, and we do a lot of databases on real-time stuff.
Me too, sir. I'm not aware of any. That's something that I will have to follow up with the scorekeepers. But I don't see how possible it will cost that kind of money. We already have the Maryland Ready system in place. I mean, we have countless databases that are there. I can't see it costing that much.
Okay. Then I further go. Can I keep going, Madam Chair? Yes. Thank you. So up to the last page, and on page 4, it says, additionally, MTA anticipates needing 2 facility managers to escort union representatives on property to MTA at a cost of $376,900. Now, what kind of job can I get doing that?
Once again, sir, I would have to ask, who are they flying in on chartered plane to do this? The CEO? Owner board members? I mean, again, we're professionals. We do this for a living. I just can't see. If the FRA came in and wanted to inspect the facility right now, well, they'd have someone come and escort them around. Do they bill the government that kind of money every year? I don't know.
So you're not making that kind of money?
No, I don't make that kind of money. Okay. I wish I did.
And Delegate, if I could just follow up.
Yes, sir.
The fiscal note also says that DOS assumes existing MTA employees can likely escort union representatives onto property leased by MTA, as the bill specifies.
I just saw the money. It looks pretty It's not cheap. Thank you. That's all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Otto?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Stein, is this bill substantially different from the other bills that we've had in numerous years in the past?
It is in the sense that it has these additional provisions. For example, the length of the train, the amount of time that a train could block a rail crossing, and access for union representatives, and maybe additional language. The two-person crew language is substantially the same, though not identical.
Okay. And also, would that impact, this impacts dual usage tracks with passengers and freight?
So, yes, it would, in that it would just require, it doesn't change anything as far as the operations of the train. Like 99% of freight railroads, they have two-person crews on their trains. So it would not necessarily mandate anything extra or different from what they're currently doing. Passenger trains routinely have 2-3 members on their crew, so it wouldn't substantially change anything in that regard.
Well, in the past, we have dealt, Norfolk Southern owns the tracks in my district, and now the local railroad operates them, but we've had interest in doing like excursion events with passengers, and I don't want them to be inflicted with unintended consequences by this. I mean, we've talked about like a polar train and Christmas time in Berlin and things. Will this bill impact that?
Yeah, Delegate, one change in the two-person crew language from previous years is that short lines are not excluded from this bill, whereas they were excluded before, but we'd be happy to put that exclusion.
So they're not excluded now in this bill?
Right, correct.
You've answered my question, then. Thank you.
But Delegate, we are willing to exclude that.
Okay, chewing on, Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Stein, for your persistence in this. And I hope this is the year we can finally make railroad workers safe, and safe for all of us. So I just have a couple quick questions, I guess, following up on some previous questions. First of all, I wanted to follow up on Delegate Morgan's question about uncoupling the train. So I still don't quite understand. I understand that you have the ability to uncouple it, but then how do you push it away? Like, you can't just jump down and push. It's got to be pretty heavy.
Big guys. Yes, of course, the train is pulled from locomotives on the head end. And now, of course, we have distributed power technology, which may put one or more locomotives in the middle of or on the rear of a train. But the operators are always on the head end of the train. And again, imagine a crossing, you're trying to get home, the train is stopped for whatever reason on the crossing, whether it's because of railroad operations or unfortunate accident, something of that nature that has stopped the train. The second crew member would walk back to the crossing that needs to be cleared, walk beyond the crossing towards the rear of the train, uncouple the cars that are stationary but will remain clear of the blocked crossing, and then give instructions to the engineer still on the head end to pull the train ahead as many cars as is necessary, car lengths we're talking about necessary, be it 50 feet, 200 feet, what have you, to clear the road crossing up, allow the crossing protection devices, the gates and lights that flash at some crossings, to go up and allow for traffic to resume operation, which again in many instances would allow first responder vehicles to approach the site where the incident occurred and be able to administer aid. When this is all over, it happens in reverse. The same employee or a relieving employee, once the crossing is known to be clear, everything's out of the way, we give instructions to the engineer on the head end to shove the train back to where the standing car is on the other side of the crossing, make the cars and the air connection solid again, and then the train would proceed at the point that it was able to continue on its journey.
Okay, thank you. That mostly answers my question.
May I
but-
follow up on that?
Yes, please.
So let's go with crossing A,
Okay.
right? Crossing A, we're coming up with the train. Let's just say there's a car accident right here at crossing A. We can stop short, so that keeps that crossing clear. And there's another train, another crossing back here. Let's call that one crossing C. The conductor can come back, make the cut at crossing C, and pull a little forward to clear that crossing so cars can get through. And if it was a crossing D and E or so on, we would just make the same adjustments, basically.
Thank you, but if the train is stopped at crossing A, how can it move forward any to clear the, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm getting hung up on technical details. I'm just having trouble understanding.
It's understood. Again, every situation is going to be different. The important thing is there's a ground service employee who would be able to the second crew member would immediately be able to go back and essentially answer all the questions you're asking by looking at the scenario as it is and taking the appropriate action to clear up either all crossings, the most affected crossing, or the most necessary crossing based on the incident as it were at the time.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I don't really need to completely understand it as long as you understand what you're doing. And I think it seems like this is another reason why the two-member crew is necessary, because you have to have somebody who can go back and
One
do
of
that.
the other things that we often get from the railroads in their alternative to having two people on the crew is they're going to send someone out in a utility truck, a high rail truck, a highway truck that would approach the railroad. How is it going to approach this area efficiently if there's 40 cars that are waiting for the train to clear and they can't actually get to the crossing?
Okay.
It's situations like that where it's just vitally important that we have that second person on the head end to take immediate action for everyone's safety.
Thank you so much. One more question, Madam Chair. Thank you. So I wanted to follow up. I think it was Delegate Ziegler that was asking about the hazardous materials reporting, and the topic of the FEMA came up. And it just, obviously there are now people who are not officially government employees who may not have security clearances who are accessing parts of the federal government data. And so it's possible that data sent to FEMA may not be secure at some point in the future. And would you be open to removing FEMA from the reporting requirement? And what would be the implications if we remove them? That's a big question, I know.
Yeah, that's a big one. So for now, FEMA is there.
Okay.
So maybe we could do something conditionally, maybe. But I certainly would not want to remove FEMA out of the process for as long as they're there, because that's literally their job, is to coordinate.
They're there, but I just don't know how much we can trust the security of information in federal agencies anymore. Where this seems like it's information that really should be secure.
Well, think about it a different way, right? No matter what, if a train derails, the FRA, NTSB, they're going in. They need that information. I mean, it's not as though if we kept it strictly into Maryland that they couldn't have it. They have to have it, their jurisdiction. So maybe conditionally if FEMA is taken off the map, but I don't know if I would necessarily go with.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Delegate Holmes.
Thank you. You've almost completely answered the question, but in my mind, I've got a question that only requires a single word answer, yes or no. In order to clear the rail when there's trains on the track, clear the crossing when there's trains on the track, is there an engine or a locomotive on the front of the train and on the back of the train? Yes or no?
I can't answer yes or no to that because it could be different for each train that operates. There has to be an engine on the front of the train. Okay. Yes to that.
But nothing on the rear of the train to energize it. No locomotive, nothing like that. Okay. All right.
Thank you. And I'd just like to ask a clarifying question. And thank you, Delegate Stein, for continuing to advocate for two-person crew. The opponents will talk about technology. And I just want to be clear that even with technology, just like we're seeing electric vehicle cars or hybrid cars or hydrogen fueled cars, is it your stance that even if we go automated with trains, that 2 or more people still need to be required on them?
Yes, that's my, Madam Chair, that's my position, and perhaps David can elaborate, but for the reason that Tom indicated, that you need a second human being to go back. The engineer needs to stay on the train, cannot get out. But if you have a second crew member, that person can go out, assess the situation, order the uncoupling. I don't see how technology would be able to do that. And David, if there's any.
Thank you, Delegate. 2 persons are always, in my opinion, they're always required. There's no technology that can replace a person being there to deal with emergencies as they come up.
Right.
The railroad has a lot of moving parts. There will always be something, some type of emergency affecting operations. You need people there to deal with it.
I just wanted that clarified for the record.
Yes, ma'am.
And then lastly, you talked about California and Washington?
No, New York.
I'm sorry. Past 2-person crew. And do we know, since then and before them, is there a comparison about safety and or a reduction of accidents?
No, ma'am, not to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for this panel? Okay, seeing none, thank you so much. We will move to the unfavorable panel. I believe we have Brian Hammock, CSX, and Sean Malone, Norfolk Southern. Thank you, gentlemen. You may begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Brian Hammock with CSX Transportation. The bill before you creates a regulatory framework that has not been seen in the state of Maryland for over 100 years. Many of the provisions in this bill are already being addressed, and mostly addressed because of the extensive federal regulations that we have in place with agencies like the U.S. Department of Transportation, the Surface Transportation Board, and the Federal Railroad Administration that oversees railroad safety throughout the country. I want to talk about a few provisions in the bill that have been discussed today. First, regarding block crossings. In my written testimony, I shared a map of the Port of Baltimore, and it marks in a red X every at-grade crossing in port facilities or around port facilities that we would not be able to occupy for more than 5 minutes when we're trying to run our port business. It would be impossible to run railroad operations out of the Port of Baltimore with a provision like a 5-minute restriction in place. That's why the federal government has said, when other states have put these restrictions in place, that they are preempted federally. Regarding train length, and an arbitrary 8,500-foot restriction would essentially mean that the Port of Baltimore, which is the #1 port in America for the import and exports of autos, would no longer be able to import and export autos. Auto trains run 12,000 feet. Those, when the Key Bridge came down and diversions were very quick to happen, other ports picked up the cargo that couldn't come to Baltimore. If we put in restrictions that make it less economical to bring trains into Baltimore, we will see diversions again. Regarding the hazmat reporting, we're already reporting this to the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. So that would be duplicative, and I'm happy to answer further questions.
We will hopefully be able to ask those questions. You go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. It's 2 times in 1 week. I'm starting to feel like an actual lobbyist again. On behalf of Norfolk Southern, my name is Sean Malone, and we're testifying in opposition to this bill. I do want to thank the sponsor for continuing to make safety of the railroads a priority. It is also a priority of the companies that both Brian and I represent. With regard, look, part of my day job is negotiating labor contracts, and Mr. Pendleton and I agree. Getting this clause about 2-man crew out of a labor contract In 25 years of negotiating labor contracts, I've never been into an arbitration where I was able to, because the burden is on the person moving to get it out. It doesn't just come out of a contract. And Mr. Pendleton and I agree, it's not coming out of this contract. Our companies are already operating with two-man crews. And there is a federal regulation that acts as a suspender to the belt that's already in place. It's why this language is needed. And it is a tricky thing when legislators just start taking labor clauses and putting them into law, because you are actually starting to intervene in the labor collective bargaining process, and these two sides have agreed and they've worked through this. It's already in place. It's not necessary. With regard to the railroad crossings, these are where trains meet. These are where crews swap. This is where we serve customers and we have breakdowns, as well as we wait for other trains to avoid collisions. So putting in place an arbitrary 5-minute, I'm not even quite sure why it's being advocated for, but we're really interrupting the operations of the train company, because you're saying you got to move or you're going to get fined by a state regulator. Clearly, it's in the interest of the train companies to move this freight and to move what they're carrying. They don't stop to go get a burger and hang out. Our crews do the responsible thing. Our employees do the responsible thing. They're moving this freight. And it's for operational reasons that they've stopped. And with that, I'll submit in respect for the time.
Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Hammack, if I understand, part of your position is that we shouldn't do this because it's already regulated at the federal level. So I guess similar to my other questions, how do we know, we don't know that this is going to continue to be regulated at the federal level. Things are changing very fast. There's a lot of uncertainty about what happens at the federal level. There are people being laid off en masse. There are regulations being undone that have been already put in place. So why should we, as Maryland, not want to protect our state when we just don't know what the federal government's going to be doing?
I don't think there's any, rush that the federal government's changing existing federal regulation of railroads. I think that, there's a rule in place, and there's 6 different provisions that are in this bill. So let's talk about the crew size in relation to your question. And if we want to talk about the other ones, I can go through that as well. But for crew size, we have the Federal Railroad Administration did a rulemaking process, and they adopted a very extensive rule at the federal level that requires 2-person crews on freight trains. In addition to that, as Mr. Malone said, there's collective bargaining agreements in place that we cannot change. The railroads cannot even initiate bargaining on the size of the crew for a period of time right now, probably until about the 2030s, depending on retirements, where that can even be an issue on the table. So there's, just like 10 years ago when we came in on this bill first, when it was just crew size, there was no immediacy to the issue. It was really just, a future potential protection that was already in collective bargaining. We're in that same position today. We're going to have 2 people on the cab of a train right now. We are going to into the future. So I'd submit to you that there's no, this bill isn't protecting anything. It's already in place. It's, it's preempted at the federal level because when the federal government adopted the regulations, it said that states were preempted from adopting restrictions on the crew size. We operate in interstate commerce. We travel in 26 states. We need to be able to operate under one set of rules. We can't stop at the state line to operate the railroad differently.
Thank you, but unfortunately, while you're not supposed to be able to just withdraw regulations, we're just seeing a lot of things being done that you're not supposed to be able to do. We just, I think yesterday, saw the federal government cancel New York's, congestion pricing. And, so things are happening that the federal government can just unilaterally wave their hand. DOJ may decide that 2-man crew is not cost effective for the railroads. And so why shouldn't we have this in place in case that happens?
Delegate, I think respectfully, and I understand your fear, it's in the labor contract. As Mr. Pendleton said, it's not coming out.
And thank you, Mr. Malone, and I understand that. But I also understand that the National Labor Relations Board no longer has a quorum. So if you violate the labor contract, what recourse to the workers
We haven't
have?
violated the labor contract. And I think the National Labor Relations Board, there's a whole body of law that relates to this. This would need to go before an arbitrator. Under the agreement, if either of these companies had a proposal and decide they're going to go to arbitration on it to change this, and the burden is very high. It's the National Labor Relations Board. If it were dissolved tomorrow, there's still a labor agreement. There's a contractual agreement between them, and those disputes are resolved by arbitrators. It's in the contract. Mr. Pendleton has testified to it. I fully agree with him. It doesn't just come out willy-nilly.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And Delegate Foley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to go back to that issue. And first of all, let me ask you a question. You're talking about the NLRB. Aren't you covered by the Railway Labor Act and not the NLRB?
The national, yes, but a lot of these.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear on that because you were talking as if you were covered by the NLRB.
The question was about the NLRB.
Right. Okay, but you're covered by the Railway Labor Act, right? Yeah. Okay. I wanted to make sure. So this issue of collective bargaining. I mean, Mr. Malone, you said two things. One, now you're saying that the collective bargaining agreement, it's in the collective bargaining agreement, and therefore it's protected. And I appreciate that, and I'm glad it's in the collective bargaining agreement. But we all know that those things do get renegotiated whenever that is. And you also said that, that we should not take things that are in the collective bargaining agreement and put them into law. But then you cited the federal law that includes the two-man crew as a reason to not need to do this. So we've actually done that. We've actually taken collective bargaining agreement provision, and now it's in federal law. And I think Delegate Reith's question was, federal law goes away. So what happens? So my question is, if this is in the collective bargaining agreement and you're already doing it, and I think you agree that it's probably a good policy, or you wouldn't have agreed to it in the collective bargaining agreement. What is the problem with putting it in Maryland law just to make sure that if all of that goes away, we still have that safety provision?
Look, Dahlia, as I indicated, a provision in a labor contract, and Mr. Pendleton and I don't disagree on this, contracts are negotiated. Provisions can be renegotiated. But when the parties come to the table with an existing clause, and one is not interested in changing that agreement, it is an uphill fight to do it. You have to ultimately get an arbitrator to agree with you on that. So clauses are not pulled from labor contracts every day, every negotiation. And I don't negotiate railroad contracts, but in 25 years of doing public sector contracts, literally have never had a clause taken out of a contract in an arbitration. So it's just not, it's not a real reality or a threat facing, because the company and the union agree and have agreed.
Well, I bargained labor contracts myself for 30 years, and I have seen instances where things have come out of collective bargaining agreements that have been in there when the power dynamic changes. But I don't want to continue to argue that point. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Jacobs?
Madam Chair, I think we beat the labor thing to death, so I want to talk about the business side. Because, the federal government, the state government, we've all made enormous investment into the future with the Howard Street Tunnel and whatnot. And to be competitive with the rest of the country so that Baltimore stays competitive with the other ports. So I'm very concerned with this language in the bill that doesn't allow train to be over 8,500 feet. When we've made all this enormous investment, and really, I don't know that 8,500 feet in length of trains was part of the thought when the investment was put into Howard Street Tunnel to make that expansion so we could do this. I thought it was to make us more competitive with with all the other ports, or even more, really put us in a better place. But I believe it, and you can verify this or not, this 8,500 is going to push us backwards instead of forwards in what we're trying to achieve in this effort, especially with the Howard Street Tunnel. Would you agree or not?
I would agree. It essentially negates the benefit of the Howard Street Tunnel. It negates the benefit of the $2 billion investment at Trade Point Atlantic that MSC is making to build a container terminal at that facility. The intermodal trains are 1,200 feet long. If they're coming out of Chicago, they're going to an East Coast port. They have many to choose from. They have New York, they have Philadelphia, they have Baltimore, they have Norfolk, they have ports down south. If we had to stop and send a smaller train just because it was going to the Port of Baltimore, they would divert. So it's not, the network would adapt around Maryland. So the types of trains that need to be that long would just go to other states because they can. It's discretionary. The cargo that has to come to Baltimore would come here. It would probably come here on truck because that would then, the cost between truck and rail, would be offset, and you'd probably see more trucking. So you'd put more trucks on the road.
So I don't know the answer to this, but do any of these other major ports that we're trying to compete with have a 8,500-foot train restriction?
No.
Thank you.
Delegate Otto.
Madam Chair. I asked the panel here, are these trains or equipped with GPS and things?
Yes.
Do you monitor their movement?
Yes.
And you pretty much know where they are and if they're moving at all times?
Yes.
And you know what they're hauling?
We do.
You have a manifest and things, and you have the potential for emergency services to have that information.
We do.
Yeah, of every place you're going through.
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate your answers.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the opponents? Thank you. Seeing none, that ends the bill hearing for HB 958, or I should say we are uncoupling from this hearing at this point. Delegate Stewart.
Motor Vehicle and Transportation will meet at 4:35 in 22 minutes. 4:35 on Zoom.
We are adjourned. Thank